long before recorded history, before empires rose and fell. There are whispers of beings who came from the heavens, the Anunnaki. Were they gods, rulers, or something far more mysterious? Ancient Sumerian tablets describe them as powerful entities who shaped humanity itself. But what if these weren't just myths? What if they were fragments of a truth long buried? This is Dark History, and today, we unravel one of the oldest and most chilling mysteries of our past. If you're fascinated by ancient secrets, lost civilizations, and forbidden knowledge, then don't just watch. Subscribe to join our journey into the shadows of history. The story of the Anunnaki begins now. Chapter 1. The Whisper of the Ancients. Imagine the vastness of time thousands of years before our modern civilizations rose. Before Rome, before Egypt built her pyramids, before even the first words of recorded history were carved into clay. Long before all that, a story was whispered in the lands of Mesopotamia. A story about gods. Or perhaps something else. Something older, something greater. They were called the Anunnaki to the Sumerians, the people who first built cities, temples, and writing. The Anunnaki were not simply spirits or abstract deities. They were rulers, judges, beings who shaped the order of the cosmos itself. They were said to descend from the sky, to dwell among humans, to teach and to punish. Their names carried power, and their presence defined an entire civilization's view of the world. But who were they really? Were they gods, as the ancients believed? Were they symbolic, mere personifications of nature? Or, as some modern theories dare to suggest, were they something else entirely? Visitors from beyond our world. The story begins in Sumer, the cradle of civilization. The fertile lands between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers gave birth to humanity's first cities, Uruk, Ur-Eridu, and in those cities, carved into clay tablets, we find the earliest references to the Anunnaki. These weren't casual myths told around a fire. No, the Sumerians wrote them into their creation stories, their legal codes, even their royal decrees. The Anunnaki were everywhere. Their very name meant those who came from the heavens to earth. Imagine what that must have felt like to the people of the time. To look up at the endless sky, to wonder what lived among the stars, and to believe that those beings had descended to walk among you. The Anunnaki were said to be children of the sky god, Anu, and their role was not minor. They were the judges of human destiny. They sat in council, deciding the fates of kings and the fates of nations. When great floods swept the land, when empires rose and fell, the Sumerians believed it was by the hands of the Anunnaki. In one tale, they are described as numbering 50 great gods, each with authority, each holding dominion over parts of the earth and the heavens. They were feared, respected, worshipped, and yet, sometimes, distrusted. For the Anunnaki were not benevolent in the way later religions imagined angels or saints. No, they were beings of power, and power can be cruel. As centuries passed, their stories spread. The Akkadians, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, all of them adopted the Anunnaki into their pantheon, reshaping the myths, but never erasing them. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest stories ever told, the Anunnaki appear as judges of the dead, dwelling in the underworld. Their names linger in spells, in prayers, in warnings. The people of Mesopotamia could not imagine a universe without them. But here's where the story begins to shift from ancient myth into modern mystery. When archaeologists unearthed the ruins of Mesopotamia in the 19th and 20th centuries, they discovered thousands of clay tablets covered in cuneiform script. Buried in these tablets were stories of the Anunnaki not as vague, distant gods, but as beings who came down to earth, who taught humanity, who gave kingship to mankind. And then, even more startling, there were fragments that spoke of the black-headed people, the Sumerians themselves, being fashioned by the Anunnaki, humans, created by these beings. It's here that modern theorists stepped in. Authors like Zecharia Sitchin looked at these stories and asked, what if the Sumerians were not simply imagining gods? What if they were recording history the only way they knew how? What if the Anunnaki were not mythical at all, but real? According to this controversial theory, the Anunnaki were not gods in the sense we understand. They were advanced beings, possibly from another planet. Some suggest they came from Nibiru, a mysterious 12th planet said to pass near Earth only once every few thousand years. When it did, the Anunnaki could descend, shaping human civilization, harvesting resources, and perhaps even altering our very DNA. It is, of course, a bold claim. Mainstream historians dismiss it. They call it pseudoscience, and yet, the allure of the idea refuses to fade. Because when you look at the clay tablets, when you read the words written 5,000 years ago, you cannot help but feel the weight of something uncanny. Why did the Sumerians, humanity's very first civilization, claim they were taught everything, agriculture, laws, astronomy, by the Anunnaki? Why did they believe their kingship, their right to rule, descended directly from these sky beings? Why, out of all the myths of the ancient world, does this one feel so detailed, so deliberate? The mystery of the Anunnaki is not just about gods or aliens. It is about power, about control, about how humanity first began to understand its place in the universe. Imagine you are a Sumerian, living 5,000 years ago. You till the fields, you worship in the ziggurat, you obey the king, and above all, you believe you are watched, judged, guided, not by distant stars or silent heavens, but by beings who once walked beside your ancestors, beings who may one day return. That is the heartbeat of this mystery, the question that refuses to die. Were the Anunnaki simply myths, born of imagination and fear? Or were they something more, traces of a forgotten chapter in human history, one too strange for us to fully grasp? As we begin this journey through 20 chapters of history, myth, and speculation, we will explore every corner of the Anunnaki story. We will travel from the ancient temples of Mesopotamia to the theories of modern science fiction. We will see how legends evolve, how ideas echo across cultures, how whispers from 5,000 years ago still haunt us today and here. In Chapter 1, we leave you with a simple truth. The Sumerians believed, with all their hearts, that the Anunnaki were real. They were not distant. They were not metaphors. They were the reason civilization existed. What we do with that knowledge, whether we dismiss it as myth or embrace it as mysteries, the question that will guide us. And so, the story begins. The Anunnaki, those who came from the heavens to earth, judges of fate, creators of kings, and perhaps the oldest secret humanity has ever carried. Chapter 2. The First Cities and the Arrival of the Gods. The desert wind sweeps across the land of ancient Mesopotamia, carrying with it the scent of clay and reeds, the murmur of rivers, and the echoes of stories too old to trace. Here, between the Tigris and Euphrates, the first spark of civilization took root, and at the very heart of it all, the Sumerians told a tale. Their greatness was not their own. The very cities they built, the knowledge they possessed, the kings who ruled them, it all came from the Anunnaki. The Sumerians were unlike any people before them. Around 4000 BCE, they raised the first cities the world had ever seen. Uruk, Lagash, Eridu, towers of mud brick rose from the flat plains. Ziggurats stretched toward the skies, and canals carved the land into thriving fields of grain. To us today, these may seem like the natural evolution of humanity's ingenuity, but to the Sumerians, none of it was accidental. None of it was human alone. They said the Anunnaki descended and taught them. Clay tablets described the Anunnaki, granting the gifts of civilization, teaching humans how to grow crops, how to measure time, how to build temples that touched the heavens. The gods were not distant watchers in the sky. They were present, they instructed, they gave dot, and always, they demanded something in return. The Sumerians believed kingship itself was handed down from the heavens. Their rulers were not ordinary men, they were chosen, anointed by the Anunnaki. A king did not rule because he was powerful. He ruled because the gods had placed him there. This idea became the cornerstone of Mesopotamian society. To obey the king was to obey the Anunnaki. To rebel against the throne was to rebel against the very beings who had shaped the world. Imagine the awe and fear of living in such a world. Every law, every temple, every harvest was tied not to chance but to the will of celestial beings. The ziggurat towering over the city was not just a temple lit, was a stairway between worlds, a place where the Anunnaki could descend and commune with humanity. But who, exactly, were these gods? The Sumerians gave them names. Enki, the wise lord of the waters, who brought knowledge and guided humanity. Enlil, the storm god, fierce and commanding, who decided the fates of men. Ninhursag, the mother goddess, associated with creation and life. And of course Anu, the father of the heavens, from whom all authority flowed together. These beings shaped not just the myths, but the daily reality of Mesopotamia. Every ritual, every offering, every prayer was meant to keep the delicate balance between human and divine. But woven into these myths is something more curious, an undercurrent of contact. The stories do not always speak of distant heavens. They speak of arrival, of the gods coming down. Take the story of Eridu, believed to be the very first city. The Sumerians said it was not built by human hands alone. It was founded by the god Enki himself, who descended from the heavens and established it as the first place of kingship. From Eridu, civilization spread by the will of the Anunnaki. Why such precision in the tale? Why insist that a god descended and founded the first city? Could it be myth or memory? Modern historians, of course, explain this as metaphor. The Sumerians, they say, used the idea of gods to justify human authority. Kings claimed divine approval, so their subjects would obey them without question. To the scholars, the Anunnaki were simply personifications of natural forces, storms, rivers, fertility, justice, and yet, the clay tablets themselves don't read like metaphor, they read like records. They describe the descent of the gods, their counsels, their instructions. They speak of kingship being lowered from the heavens. They even describe the Anunnaki as beings of flesh and form, not abstract spirits. For those who look deeper, it raises a troubling question. Were the Sumerians writing allegory, or were they describing something they truly witnessed? The Enki were said to live not only in the heavens, but also among humans. They built temples, walked the fields, and feasted at banquets with kings. They were often described in startlingly human terms, tall, powerful, radiant, but not intangible. And unlike other mythologies, where gods remain untouchable, the Anunnaki could be appeased, angered, or even deceived. This blurring of the line between divine and human gives rise to a chilling thought. What if the Anunnaki were not gods in the way we think of gods? What if they were beings of great power, but flesh and blood nonetheless? And so, the first cities rose under their watch. Humanity, guided by their wisdom, more perhaps controlled by their will, began its great experiment of civilization. Every brick laid, every field sown, every law enforced, carried the shadow of the Anunnaki. But what was the true purpose of this guidance? Why did these beings descend to earth at all? Were they benevolent teachers, lifting humanity out of darkness? Or were they rulers, exploiting mankind for their own ends? The Sumerians do not say clearly. Their tablets whisper half-answers, fragments of stories, hints of a greater plan. And as we turn to the next chapter, the mystery only deepens, because the stories of the Anunnaki do not stop with creation and kingship. They also speak of rebellion, of control, and of a fate that was never fully in human hands. And so the question lingers in the stillness of history. Did the Anunnaki raise humanity to greatness, or bind us to their will? The answer lies ahead, in the shadows of their myths. Chapter 3: The Gods of Sky and Earth. The sun rises slowly over the land of Mesopotamia, casting long shadows across the rivers, temples, and fields. As the first light touches the mud-brick walls of the cities, the people of Sumer begin their day, not with the thought of themselves, but with reverence for the beings they believed walked among them. They Nunnaki. To the Sumerians. These beings were not distant stars or abstract ideas. They were flesh, presence, and power. They were the ones who shaped the world, who divided heaven from earth, and who decided the fate of every man and woman who ever lived. At the head of this pantheon stood Anu, the Sky Father. High above, he ruled from the heavens, rarely descending. Yet his authority was absolute. Anu was the keeper of destinies, the one who held the heavens themselves in balance. To the Sumerians, he was the ceiling of the universe, the force that made all things possible, but he was also distant, unreachable, almost too vast to comprehend. Beneath him stood Enlil, his son, lord of the air and storms. Unlike his father, Enlil was present, direct, and terrifying. He was the god who decided the fates of kingdoms, who sent floods, who struck down those who disobeyed. In the myths, Enlil is often portrayed as stern, commanding a figure who brooked no resistance. It was said that he separated heaven and earth, cleaving the universe so the realms of men and gods could exist. And in that division, he also made himself the one who stood between humanity and the heavens. Then there was Enki, brother to Enlil, lord of the waters and of wisdom. Unlike the storm god, Enki was compassionate, clever, even cunning. He was the trickster, the problem solver, the one who found loopholes in fate itself. When the other gods decreed destruction, Enki often whispered secrets to humankind, helping them survive. Too many. He was the true friend of mankind. His temple at Eridu was said to be the first of all temples, the place where civilization itself began, and presiding over life itself was Ninhursag, the Great Mother, the goddess of fertility and creation. In her hands lay the power to bring forth kings, nations, and crops alike, where Enlil ruled with storms and Enki with wisdom. Ninhursag ruled with the mystery of life itself. These gods were the great four pillars of the Anunnaki, but they were not alone. Surrounding them was an entire host of deities lesser, but still powerful. Together, they formed a divine assembly, a council where decisions were made that shaped the course of history. To the Sumerians, this assembly was not metaphor, it was as real as the council of elders in their cities. The gods met, they debated, they passed judgments, and once their decision was made, nothing could overturn it. Fate was sealed. But hidden within these stories lies something unsettling. The Anunnaki did not always act like gods in the way we imagine gods. They quarreled, they fought, they showed jealousy, anger, even pettiness. They could be tricked, outmaneuvered, or deceived. They could love and hate, bless and curse, protect and destroy, all in ways that feel deeply human. By would the Sumerians describe their gods this way? Why not make them perfect, eternal, unchanging? Why insist instead that they walked, argued, laughed, feasted, and punished like flesh and blood beings? Could it be that the Sumerians were not simply imagining divine archetypes, but remembering encounters with powerful beings who were more like us than we care to admit? One story tells of the the divine laws of civilization itself. According to legend, these sacred decrees were kept by Enki in the city of Eridu. They were not just laws of men, but the very blueprints of society: kingship, music, craftsmanship, justice, even deceit. Everything that makes civilization function was contained in the But the goddess Inanna, daughter of Anu and Queen of Heaven, desired them for her own city of Uruk, through cunning and seduction. She visited Enki, plied him with drink, and tricked him into giving her the me. By the time Enki sobered, it was too late. Inanna had fled with the treasures, bringing them to Uruk, and making her city the center of Sumerian culture. It is a story of theft, of cleverness, of gods outwitted. But what if it is more than myth? What if it is a memory of sacred knowledge transferred from one place to another, of advanced teachings, tools of civilization guarded and moved by beings who were very much real? The pantheon of the Anunnaki reveals something crucial. They were not united. They were divided in purpose, sometimes even in open conflict. Enlil commanded authority, but was feared for his harshness. Enki opposed him at times, choosing mercy where his brother chose punishment. Inanna schemed for power. Even Anu, the Sky Father, was not always present to resolve disputes. To humanity, this meant one thing: survival often depended not on appeasing all the gods, but on choosing the right one to serve. A farmer might pray to Enki for water. A king might dedicate a temple to Enlil to secure his reign. A mother might offer to Ninursag 4 children. Each god had power, but each also had weaknesses, rivalries, and agendas. And so the world of the Sumerians was not one of divine harmony, but of divine politics. The heavens mirrored the earth, a court of rulers, rivalries, alliances, and betrayals. But if these beings were indeed flesh and presence, if they walked among mankind, as the stories say, then another question emerges: were humans merely pawns in their disputes? Was civilization itself born not of human will, but of the conflicts of these mysterious beings who came from beyond? The tablets are silent on this question. They give us fragments, half-answers, riddles carved into clay, but the impression is unmistakable. Humanity's fate was tied to beings who were not perfect, not unified, and perhaps not even divine in the way later cultures would define gods. They were powerful, they were dangerous, they were everywhere, and as the Sumerians built their temples and raised their kings, one thing became clear: the Anunnaki were not only givers of knowledge, they were also takers of labor, devotion, and life itself. The story of the Anunnaki does not end with their arrival. It deepens, darkens, and leads us into stranger territory. Because soon, the tablets begin to speak not only of gods and cities but of creation itself, and the role the Anunnaki played in the very making of mankind. Chapter 4: The Creation of Humanity. The winds of Mesopotamia carry whispers of a story older than pyramids, older than empires, older even than the memory of kings. It is the story of how we came to be, not in silence, not by chance, but by the hands of the Anunnaki. The Sumerians left us no room for doubt. They believed that humankind was not an accident of nature, nor the slow work of chance. Instead, we were created with intention, by those who walked the earth before us. The burden of the gods. The tale begins not with humanity, but with the gods themselves. The Anunnaki were powerful, yes, but their lives were not without toil. Though they were called divine, they too had work to do. They dug canals, they raised cities, they labored to maintain order on earth. In one story, the lesser gods, known as the Igigi, were tasked with endless labor. They dug deep into the soil, carried heavy loads, and sustained the needs of the greater Anunnaki. But the burden became unbearable. After years of toil, the Igigi grew restless. Their patience with servitude ended. At night, under the cover of darkness, they gathered their tools and set fire to them. They surrounded Enlil's great house, shouting rebellion. Enough, they cried. We will not dig, we will not carry, we will not serve any longer. The Anunnaki faced a crisis. If the Igigi refused their labor, who would tend the earth? Who would feed the temples? Who would sustain the cities? It was then that a plan began to form. The idea of creation, the council of the gods, was summoned. Enlil was furious. his authority challenged. But Enki, Lord of Wisdom, saw a different path. If the Ajiji would no longer serve, perhaps another being could take their place, a being strong enough to work the fields, patient enough to bear burdens, intelligent enough to follow orders. The gods agreed. They would create a new creature humanity. But creation was no simple matter. To fashion a servant, the Anunnaki would need more than clay. They would need something of themselves. The divine mixture. The texts speak of a strange and sacred ritual. The gods chose a sacrifice, one of their own. The blood of a god was mixed with clay, the soil of the earth itself. Into this mixture went the essence of divinity and the substance of the world. With chants and ritual, the mixture was shaped. Hands molded the forms. Life was breathed into the figures. And from this sacred union of God and earth, mankind was born. We were not made as equals. We were made as workers. Our destiny was service. Our lives offerings. The temples we built, the food we grew, the sacrifices we gave, all were for the Anunnaki. But within us flowed the spark of divinity. In our veins ran not just blood, but the essence of gods. And that spark would not remain silent forever. The first people. At first, humanity was fragile. The early beings were imperfect, unable to survive. The gods made attempt after attempt, shaping new forms, discarding those that failed. Some were said to be too weak, others too strange, unable to bear the labor. But eventually, the balance was found. The humans of clay and blood endured. They stood upright. They spoke. They tilled the earth. The Sumerians believed this was the dawn of civilization. With humans in place, the gods were free from toil. The temples were filled. The rivers were managed. The work was done. And so the covenant was formed. Humans would labor, and in return, the gods would sustain order. The hidden meaning. But beneath this tale lies a haunting question. Were the Sumerians describing myth or memory? The image of gods. Mixing clay with divine blood seems symbolic, but could it also be a distant recollection of genetic manipulation? Ancient scribes did not know the language of science. They wrote in symbols, in images. To describe mixing of essence, they wrote of blood. To describe shaping of life, they wrote of clay. Was the story of creation not a parable, but a record? Were the Anunnaki beings with knowledge so advanced that to early humans it seemed like magic? If so, then our very existence may have been engineered, not as a gift, but as a necessity, not as an act of love, but as a solution to labor. The gods, discreet the creation of mankind, did not unite the Anunnaki. Enlil, Lord of Storms, saw humans as tools, useful, but nothing more. To him, we were property. Enki, however, felt differently. He saw in humans, not just laborers, but potential. It was Enki who had suggested creation in the first place, and, perhaps, in the mixture of blood and clay. He had given more of himself than the others knew. In the myths, Enki often plays the role of protector, whispering secrets to humanity. Was it guilt for binding us to labor? Or was it hope that one day we might rise beyond servitude? Life in service for the Sumerians. This story was not abstract. It explained their daily lives. Why must men and women toil in the fields from dawn to dusk? Because we were made to. Why must kings serve the gods with offerings? Because humanity itself was born from obligation. Even kings, no matter how powerful, were seen not as rulers, but as shepherds chosen by the gods. They governed, not for themselves, but for the divine. Every temple was both palace and granary. Every sacrifice was both offering and tax. The system was complete. Civilization itself was built on the covenant of creation. Whispers of rebellion, but there were cracks in the order. In some stories, humans multiplied too quickly, becoming noisy, restless, too numerous for Enlil's liking. Their cries disturbed the gods. Enlil, angered, considered wiping them out. Again, it was Enki who resisted. He whispered to mankind, teaching them how to survive. Where Enlil saw tools, Enki saw companions. This tension between mercy and judgment, between compassion and control, would shape the fate of humanity for centuries to come. A strange reflection, the creation myths of Mesopotamia echo in later traditions. In the Hebrew Bible, Adam is formed from the dust of the ground, given life by the breath of God. In the Greek myths, Prometheus shapes men from clay and gifts them fire. Why do so many stories, across so many lands, speak of humans shaped from earth, animated by divine essence? Perhaps they are echoes of the same memory, a story carried across time, retold in new tongues, reshaped by new cultures, always pointing back to that first moment when the Anunnaki made us from the earth and set us to work. The gift and the curse to the Sumerians. Our creation was both blessing and curse. Without us, the world could not function. But because of us, the gods no longer had to toil. We were both necessary and expendable, yet within us lay a dangerous spark, the blood of gods. It was this spark that made us clever, that made us dream, that made us restless. Perhaps the Anunnaki gave us too much. Perhaps in making us to serve, they made us capable of more than they intended. And so the story of creation is not an ending, but a beginning. It sets the stage for everything that follows. The rise of kings, the building of empires, the rebellions of man, and the wrath of the gods. We were created to serve, but would we remain servants forever? Chapter 5. The Knowledge of the Gods. The Sumerians told us something strange, something both wondrous and terrifying. They said the Anunnaki did not only create us to serve, they also held the keys to knowledge. Knowledge so great, so deep, that it shaped the fate of humanity itself. To the Sumerians, the gods were not simply mighty warriors or rulers. They were keepers of wisdom, masters of hidden arts. The very things that lifted mankind from wandering tribes to builders of cities were said to be gifts or sometimes guarded secrets of the Anunnaki. And so this chapter asks, what knowledge did the gods hold? And what fragments of it did they choose to share with us? The Tablet of Destinies in Mesopotamian myth. There was said to exist a powerful object known as the Tablet of Destinies. Not a stone tablet in the way we imagine, but something far greater. Whoever held the tablet, the stories said, had authority over the universe itself. It controlled kingship, the laws of heaven and earth, and even the fate of mortals. The Anunnaki fought over it. They guarded it jealously. Why? Because it represented the power of ultimate order, the power to shape history itself. To the Sumerians, this was not just myth. It was a way of explaining why some rulers prospered and others fell. It was not chance. It was not simply human effort. It was the decree of the gods, written in the hidden language of destiny, the gifts of civilization. But the Anunnaki did not hoard all knowledge. Some they shared. And this, the Sumerians believed, was how civilization began. From the gods came the secrets of farming, the turning of soil, the planting of seeds, the irrigation of fields. From the gods came the writing of words, cuneiform pressed into wet clay, a gift that captured memory and made it permanent. From the gods came the art of numbers, the measurement of fields, the counting of trade, the mapping of stars, even the brewing of beer, the baking of bread, and the weaving of cloth were said to be divine gifts. Civilization was not human invention. It was bestowed. Humanity's role was not to create knowledge, but to receive it. Enki, Lord of Wisdom. At the heart of this knowledge was one figure, Enki. Unlike Enlil, the stern ruler, Enki was a patron of learning, invention, and craft. His domain was the absoother watery depths beneath the earth, source of all wisdom and life. It was Enki who gave humans language, Enki who taught them how to build canals, Enki who revealed the arts of healing, divination, and ritual. The Sumerians believed that Enki's wisdom was infinite, yet dangerous. for knowledge, like fire, could warm or burn. The gods debated how much should be shared and how much kept hidden. To me, the powers of civilization. One of the strangest and most fascinating ideas from Sumer is the concept of the me. The me were not objects you could hold, nor instructions you could read. They were essences, divine decrees, cosmic blueprints that governed every aspect of life. There was a me for kingship, a me for music, a me for truth, a me for weaving, even a me for prostitution. Every part of society, from the sacred to the profane, was rooted in a me. The gods kept these in their possession, and when a god chose to grant a me to humanity, an art or institution was born. The me were dangerous. Whoever controlled them controlled civilization. When Inanna once tricked Enki into giving her many of the me, chaos and wonder spread across the land. Suddenly, cities thrived. Suddenly, temples sang. The Sumerians were saying something profound. Culture itself was not ours. It was loaned to us. It could be given. It could be taken away. The forbidden knowledge, yet not all knowledge was shared. Some remained hidden, guarded, forbidden. The Sumerians whispered of secrets too powerful for mortals. The language of the stars, by which destinies could be read. The arts of the deep waters, by which life itself could be shaped. The mysteries of life and death, locked beyond the gates of the underworld. There were boundaries. If humanity learned too much, it could disrupt the order of the cosmos, and so, the gods withheld. But sometimes, knowledge slipped through the cracks. The serpent and the garden, this tension, the giving of knowledge, and the forbidding of knowledge echoes in later stories. In the Hebrew Bible, Adam and Eve are placed in a garden, forbidden from eating of the tree of knowledge. A serpent tempts them. They eat, and their eyes are opened. Is this not a reflection of the Sumerian theme? The gods granting gifts, but drawing lines. Humans yearning to know more, to reach higher, to cross forbidden boundaries. Perhaps the serpent of Eden is a shadow of Enki, whispering secrets, giving humanity what was denied. The stars above him, among the most guarded knowledge, was the knowledge of the heavens. The Anunnaki were linked to the stars, their names tied to constellations, their stories written in the movement of planets. The Sumerians were astonishing astronomers. They tracked Venus with precision. They recorded eclipses. They measured the paths of Jupiter and Mars. How did they learn such things? Thousands of years before telescopes. They said it was taught by the gods. To them, the skies were not just distant lights. They were messages, calendars, prophecies. The Anunnaki themselves were said to descend from the heavens, and one day return. Knowledge as control. There is a darker side to these stories. If the gods gave knowledge, they also used it to control. By limiting what humans could know, they ensured obedience. By granting only certain me, they shaped society to their liking. By placing kings as their chosen shepherds, they bound people to divine law. Even the act of writing, though a gift, was first used to record offerings, taxes, and law systems that served the gods in their temples. Knowledge was power, and power was never free. Echoes in time. As centuries passed, the stories of the Anunnaki's knowledge spread and changed. The Greeks told of Prometheus, who stole fire from the gods and gave it to mankind. The Hebrews told of forbidden fruit. The Egyptians told of Thoth, god of wisdom, who measured the heavens and wrote the words of the gods. Different lands, different names, but always the same theme. Divine beings held knowledge. Humanity received it, sometimes as gift, sometimes as theft, and always there was danger in knowing too much. A haunting question. The myths leave us with a haunting possibility. What if the Sumerians were not simply telling symbolic tales? What if they were remembering real encounters with beings far more advanced than themselves? What if the me were not mystical decrees, but fragments of technology, artifacts beyond their comprehension? What if the tablet of destinies was not a symbol, but a device? What if the gods' forbidden knowledge was not magic, but science, genetics, astronomy, engineering too powerful to entrust to early mankind? If so, then perhaps our ancestors were right. Civilization was not ours alone. It was guided. It was seeded. It was taught. The double-edged gift hand. So humanity stood between ignorance and enlightenment. We were children with dangerous tools, given just enough to build, but not enough to rule ourselves fully. The knowledge of the gods was a double-edged sword. It gave us cities, but also wars. It gave us writing, but also taxes. It gave us wisdom, but also sorrow. The Sumerians saw this clearly. They lived in a world where every invention, every art, every law, traced back to the Anunnaki. They could not escape the presence of the gods in their daily lives, and perhaps, neither can we. This was the Sumerians' truth. The Anunnaki held the knowledge of the universe, and we, their creation, were forever caught between what they gave us and what they kept hidden. Chapter 6. The Rise of Kingship. From the moment the Anunnaki shaped mankind, there was a question that haunted the ancient world: who would lead? If humans were created as workers, as servants to the gods, how could they govern themselves? The Sumerians gave us their answer, in a single word that would echo through history: kingship. But kingship, they said, was not invented by men. It was not born of battle, nor of ambition. Kingship was something higher. It descended from heaven, the gift of order to the Sumerians. Life without kings was chaos. People quarreled, fields lay untended, temples fell silent. A shepherd without a flock, a city without a leader, such was the world before kingship. But the gods desired order. They desired harmony between themselves and their human creation. And so, they chose rulers, mortals, who would serve as intermediaries. Kings were not simply political leaders. They were divinely appointed shepherds, entrusted with guiding humanity, according to the will of the gods. A Sumerian hymn declares, "Kingship came down from heaven. The people did not raise a king. The Anunnaki did." The first kings, who were these first rulers? The ancient texts are tantalizingly vague, yet full of grandeur. The Sumerian king list, one of the oldest records in history, names rulers who reigned not for years, but for centuries, even millennia. Some kings were said to have ruled for 28,800 years, others for 36,000. These were not ordinary men. Were these numbers symbolic? Were they exaggerations? Or were these first kings themselves closer to gods than to mortals? Some researchers suggest that perhaps the early rulers were Anunnaki themselves, or hybrids between gods and humans. Whatever the truth, the message was clear. The earliest kings were beings of extraordinary stature, chosen to establish the foundations of civilization. The city as a divine creation. Each king ruled not only people, but a city. In Sumerian thought, a city was not a human invention. Cities too were established by the gods: Uruk, Eridu, Nippur-Kishich. City was tied to a specific deity, its temple serving as the earthly dwelling place of the divine. The king ruled in the name of that god, ensuring offerings flowed, rituals were performed, and order was maintained. To disobey a king was not merely rebellion, it was an offense against the gods themselves. Kings as shepherds, the Sumerians called their kings shepherds. A word full of symbolic weight. A shepherd guides the flock, protects it, ensures its survival. But a shepherd also owns the flock. The people belonged to their ruler, just as the ruler belonged to the gods. This bond between God, king, and people was the sacred triangle of Mesopotamian life. Break it, and chaos would follow. The burden of rule, yet kingship was not portrayed as easy or enviable. It was a heavy burden, a duty more than a privilege. Kings were expected to lead armies in war, judge disputes with fairness, build temples, dig canals, and above all, maintain justice. The Sumerian word for justice, Mesa, was central to kingship. A king who ruled unjustly risked losing divine favor and, with it, his throne. Thus, kingship was as fragile as it was powerful. It depended entirely on the continuing will of the gods. Enlil and the authority of kings. At the heart of kingship stood Enlil, lord of the wind, ruler of the cosmos, and one of the chief Anunnaki. It was Enlil who bestowed authority on kings. His temple in Nibiru, the Ekker, was the spiritual center of some. No king could rule without Enlil's blessing. When rulers claimed legitimacy, they did not point to their armies or wealth. They pointed to Nibiru. They pointed to Enlil, pointed to heaven. This was no mere politics. It was cosmic order. Kingship as divine contract. Think of kingship as a contract not between ruler and people, but between ruler and gods. The king received power in exchange for loyalty to the divine order. He was the god's servant, even as the people were his. If he faltered, if he failed to uphold justice, famine, invasion, or plague could strike. This belief gave kingship immense weight. It was not just governance. It was the balance of the universe. The expansion of power. As centuries passed, kingship evolved. Kings became not only shepherds, but conquerors. They expanded cities into empires, bringing more and more people under divine rule. Yet even in conquest, kings framed their wars not as personal ambition, but as the will of the gods. To defeat another city was to prove that one's god was stronger. To rule an empire was to extend divine order over chaos. The Mesopotamian world was never fully unified, but the idea that kingship came from heaven ensured that every city, no matter how small, claimed legitimacy through the gods. The king as builder. One of the most visible legacies of kingship was monumental construction. Kings built temples, canals, and walls, not simply as public works, but as sacred duties. The great ziggurat of yore, for example, was not only a feat of engineering, it was a cosmic ladder, connecting earth to heaven, symbolizing the king's role as bridge between gods and mortals. These projects declared, the gods favor us, and the king is their chosen instrument. Kingship and law. Another legacy was law. Kings were not above justice, they embodied it. Hammurabi of Babylon, though much later, expressed this clearly in his famous code. He declared himself chosen by the gods to establish justice, protect the weak, and destroy the wicked. Law, like kingship, was divine. To obey the law was to obey the gods. The fragility of kingship. Yet, for all its grandeur, kingship was never secure. Famine, flood, or foreign invasion could strip a ruler of legitimacy. If the gods withdrew their blessing, kings fell. The Sumerian king list reflects this fragility. Cities rose and fell, dynasties vanished, and kingship passed from one city to another. Always, it was taken up by a new ruler, a new city, chosen by the gods. This constant shifting gave Mesopotamian history its rhythm of rise and fall. But through it all, kingship endured not as human invention, but as divine mandate. The king as semi-divinity. Over time, kings themselves began to blur the line between mortal and god. Some were worshipped as divine after death. Others claimed divine parentage. Gilgamesh, for example, was said to be 2/3 divine, 1/3 human. His kingship was more than political, it was cosmic. This blending of king and god shows how deeply the idea of divine kingship had taken root. The ruler was not just chosen by the gods, he was of them. Echoes across cultures, the concept of divine kingship did not remain in Sumer. It spread, transformed, and endured. In Egypt, pharaohs were living gods. In China, rulers claimed the mandate of heaven. In medieval Europe, kings ruled by divine right. All of these ideas can be traced, in some way, to the ancient Sumerian belief that kingship descended from heaven. The human cost, but kingship also carried a darker side. It justified war, taxation, and hierarchy. The people were the flock, but they were also the burden. While kings built temples and ziggurats, it was the labor of thousands of common workers that made it possible. While kings claimed to protect justice, they also demanded obedience, for the ordinary Sumerian kingship was both blessing and weight. It brought order, but also control, a legacy that endures yet. The idea of kingship remains one of the most enduring legacies of the Anunnaki myths. Even today, we still speak of leaders as appointed, anointed, or chosen. We still imagine that power carries divine weight, even if we no longer name the gods. The Sumerians planted a seed that grew across civilizations. The belief that rulership is not just practical, but sacred. That to govern is not merely human, it is cosmic. Closing reflection. So, in the myths of the Anunnaki, kingship was never simply politics. It was a bridge between heaven and earth. It was the channel through which divine order flowed into human life. And though dynasties rose and fell, though cities crumbled into dust, the idea endured. Kingship was not born of men. It was sent from the heavens. Chapter 7: The Great Ziggurats. Stairways to Heaven. Imagine standing on the plains of Mesopotamia, nearly 4,000 years ago. The land stretches flat and wide, a sea of earth beneath an endless sky, and rising above it all, towering over the city, walls and mud brick homes, is a mountain that man himself has built, the ziggurat, to the people of Sumer. These massive stepped pyramids were not just architecture, they were cosmic machines, stairways designed to link heaven and earth, places where the gods could descend and mortals could ascend. The birth of sacred mountains. Why did the Sumerians build ziggurats? To answer that, we must look deeper into the psyche of the ancient Mesopotamians. The flat floodplains of Sumer had no mountains, no natural high places. Yet in their mythology, the gods lived on high on mountains beyond the clouds, in heavenly realms unreachable by mortals. So, the people built their own artificial mountains of brick and stone, rising tier by tier, carrying temples toward the heavens. These ziggurats were the meeting points between two realms, the mortal world of men and the eternal realm of the Anunnaki, Eridu, and the first ziggurat according to tradition. The first city was Eridu, said to have been founded by the god Enki himself. Archaeologists have uncovered the remains of what may have been the earliest ziggurat Hera platform temple rising above the plain, a prototype of the structures that would define Mesopotamian civilization. Eridu's ziggurat was dedicated to Enki, Lord of the Waters, the wise and cunning god who gave mankind knowledge. Its presence declared, "Here, the gods walk among us. Here, the divine touches the earth." The architecture of Ascensione's ziggurat was not simply a tall building. Its design carried profound meaning. Each structure was built in layers, or terraces, stacked one upon another like the steps of a ladder. A broad staircase led upward, often aligned with the cardinal directions, symbolizing cosmic order. At the summit stood the temple itself, a sacred dwelling, not for worshippers, but for the god. Ordinary people never entered these shrines. Only priests and kings could approach, bearing offerings and prayers. The ziggurat was not a place for human gatherings. It was a throne for the divine. Nippur and the Akaramung. The most important of these holy sites was the Akar in Nippur, the great ziggurat of Enlil, Lord of the cosmos. To the Mesopotamians, Nippur was the spiritual heart of the land. No king could claim legitimacy without acknowledging Enlil's authority at this sacred site. The Akar was more than stone and clay. It was believed to be the very mountain house, a cosmic center where the axis of the universe touched the earth. To ascend its steps was to move closer to the gods themselves. Ur and its towering monument, perhaps the most famous ziggurat, still visible today, is the Great Ziggurat of Ur, built by King Ur-Nammu around 2100 BCE, rising over 100 feet high. It dominated the city, a massive staircase to the heavens dedicated to Nana, the moon god. Its mud brick core was faced with baked brick, held together with bitumen, a black tar-like substance. Even in ruin, it commands awe. Imagine it in its prime, gleaming in the sun, banners fluttering from its summit, priests ascending its stairways with offerings as crowds watched from below. For the people of yore, this was not just a monument. It was the literal house of their god, towering above their lives, assuring them that Nana watched and protected. The ziggurat, as cosmic connector ziggurats, were not isolated structures. They were parts of larger temple complexes, surrounded by courtyards, storerooms, and priestly quarters. But symbolically, they stood apart. They were the cosmic connectors, the points where heaven bent down toward earth. Each brick, each tier, carried sacred meaning. The base represented the earth. The middle tiers symbolized the atmosphere, the realm of storms and winds. The summit stood for the heavens, the dwelling place of the gods. To climb a ziggurat was to journey through the layers of the cosmos. Rituals on the heights what happened atop these towering structures. The summit temples were not public places of worship. Instead, they were divine residences. The gods were believed to descend from heaven, to rest in these sanctuaries, accepting offerings, communing with priests, and guiding kings. Festivals often included processions up the ziggurat steps, with priests carrying statues or sacred vessels. Music, incense, and prayers filled the air. To the people below, the rituals affirmed a profound truth. Their gods were present, dwelling among them, their city chosen. The ziggurat and the stars. Some scholars suggest that ziggurats may also have served as astronomical observatories. Their high platforms offered clear views of the skies, vital for tracking the movements of stars, planets, and the moon. The Mesopotamians were skilled astronomers. They believed the heavens were a script, written by the gods, foretelling the fates of men and kingdoms. From the tops of ziggurats, priests could read this divine text, advising rulers on matters of war, harvest, and destiny. Thus, the ziggurat was not only a stairway for the gods to descend, it was also a watchtower for men to gaze upward, reading the messages of the cosmos. Echoes of Babel. The biblical story of the Tower of Babel is thought by many scholars to reflect the ziggurat tradition. A great tower built in Babylon, with its top in the heavens, angered God, who scattered humanity and confused their languages. This tale may preserve distant memories of the awe and fear that ziggurats inspired. To build such a stairway was to dare to reach heaven itself. Was it ambition or devotion? The line between the two was thin. The labor of thousands behind the grandeur of ziggurats lay immense human effort. Tens of thousands of laborers toiled to mold clay into bricks, dry them in the sun, and stack them tier upon tier. The work was backbreaking, often done under the harsh Mesopotamian sun. Yet the labor was considered sacred, for it served the gods. To build a ziggurat was to participate in cosmic order, to strengthen the bond between heaven and earth. Symbol of power for kings, ziggurats were also political symbols. To build or restore a ziggurat was to prove divine favor. It was to proclaim, "The gods walk with me, therefore my rule is just," inscribed on bricks and tablets. Kings boasted of their building projects. Their names became inseparable from the sacred structures. Even today, we remember Ur-Nammu, Nebuchadnezzar, and others because of their towering works, ziggurats, and the afterlife of ruins over millennia. Many ziggurats crumbled back into clay, their bricks eroded by wind and rain. Yet even in ruin, they retained sacred power. Later civilizations, Babylonians, Assyrians, Persians continued to build upon or around them, preserving their legacy. Some ziggurats remain today, silent giants in the desert, reminders of a world where gods and men were bound by towering stairways of stone. The spiritual legacy, the ziggurat tradition, echoes in cultures far beyond Mesopotamia. The pyramids of Egypt, the stepped temples of Mesoamerica, Even medieval cathedrals reaching skyward all reflect the same impulse. To bridge earth and heaven through monumental architecture. Though separated by time and geography, these structures share a spiritual DNA, one rooted in the desire to reach the divine, a bridge between worlds. To the Sumerians, ziggurats were more than buildings. They were bridges between worlds, ladders of connection, monuments of faith. When a priest climbed the steps, when incense rose into the sky, when offerings were laid at the summit temple, the people believed heaven itself leaned down to meet them. The ziggurat was a reminder that they were not alone, that the Anunnaki still watched, still ruled, still descended. Closing reflection. So, when we look upon the ruins of your Eridu or Nippur today, we see more than crumbling brick. We see humanity's first great attempt to touch the heavens. We see stairways to the gods, built with faith, fear, and endless labor. The ziggurat was not merely a monument, it was the heartbeat of a civilization, a place where heaven descended, where earth rose, and where, for a fleeting moment, the two became one. Chapter 8. The Flood Myths and the Survival of Mankind. When we look at the myths of the ancient world, there is one story that appears again and again, almost like a shadow cast across every civilization. The story of a great flood, from Mesopotamia to India, from Greece to the Americas. Cultures separated by oceans and centuries somehow tell us of waters that rose to swallow the earth, of gods who decided to wipe the slate clean, and of a chosen survivor or, sometimes a small group who lived to rebuild humanity. The Anunnaki, the mysterious figures of Sumerian lore, stand at the heart of this narrative. To the Sumerians, they were not just distant gods, living high in the heavens, but beings who shaped the destinies of humankind. And when the flood story surfaces in their tablets, it is more than a parable. It reads like a Recordon echo of something they believed had truly happened. Let us settle into this story, slowly, as though listening by the light of a fire. Imagine the sound of water in the background, calm at first, then growing louder as the tale unfolds. The Sumerian flood story in the ruins of the ancient city of Nippur. Clay tablets were uncovered that contained one of the earliest flood narratives known to man. This account predates the famous biblical flood of Noah by centuries. It tells us of Ziusudra, sometimes called the Sumerian Noah. The story begins with the gods, the Anunnaki, gathering in council. Humanity, they believed, had grown noisy, unruly, and disrespectful. The gods, weary of the chaos, decided to bring about a flood that would cleanse the earth. The Great Deluge was not a mere punishment, but an act of erasure, a reset for humanity. Yet, as in many versions of this tale, compassion emerges. One god, sometimes it is Enki, the wise and sympathetic figure among the Anunnaki, chooses to warn a human. That man is Ziusudra. He is told, in dreams or whispers, to build a vessel. He is instructed to gather his family and the seeds of all living things, for the waters are coming. The description of the vessel is fascinating. It is not just a boat, but a floating refuge, built with precision and care. Ziusudra obeys, and when the rains come, they fall for days and nights beyond counting. Rivers overflow, seas swallow the land, and the mountains vanish beneath the waves. Humanity is all but a race text for the one who listened. When the waters finally subside, Ziusudra offers a sacrifice of thanks. The smoke rises into the heavens, and the Anunnaki, who smell it, regret what they have done. They grant Ziusudra eternal life, a reward for being the savior of humankind. This tale resonates with haunting familiarity. It mirrors the later Akkadian version, with Utnapishtim, retold in the Epic of Gilgamesh, and of course, the biblical story of Noah. But here, in the earliest Sumerian account, the flood is directly tied to the decisions of the Anunnaki. The flood, as cosmic reset. Why would the gods or the Anunnaki choose such destruction? In the ancient mindset, floods were more than natural disasters. They were symbols of chaos. Water was both life-giving and deadly, capable of nourishing fields, but also sweeping away civilizations. The Sumerians lived between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Floods were part of their reality, but the Great Flood myth is far too immense, far too detailed, to be just an allegory for seasonal overflow. Instead, it seems to suggest a memory of something catastrophic. Some researchers have wondered, was there truly a massive flood in prehistory? Geological evidence hints at sudden rises in sea levels at the end of the last ice age. Around 10,000 years ago, vast ice sheets melted, sending torrents of water across the earth. Could this have been remembered, generation after generation, until it was written into myth? Others take the story more literally. If the Anunnaki were real beings, whether gods, extraterrestrials, or advanced visitors, then perhaps they orchestrated such an event, not merely as punishment, but as a way to control or restart human civilization. In either interpretation, the flood becomes a turning point, the end of one age, the beginning of another. Parallels across the world. One of the most astonishing things about the flood myth is its universality. The Sumerians told it. The Akkadians repeated it. The Hebrews inscribed it into their scriptures. But they were not alone. In India, the tale speaks of Manu, who was warned by a fish, an avatar of the god Vishnu, to build a boat. He survives the deluge and becomes the ancestor of mankind. In Greece, Deucalion and Pyrrha are spared when Zeus decides to flood the earth. They repopulate the world by casting stones behind them, which transform into humans. Among the Maya, there are stories of floods sent by the gods to erase failed creations of humanity. In Native American traditions, tribes from the Pacific Northwest, the Hopi, and even tribes near the Great Lakes carry memories of waters rising, of canoes riding above mountains, of a few who survived to tell the tale. How is it that so many distant cultures share this theme? Coincidence seems unlikely. Shared memory seems more plausible. And if the Sumerians linked this flood to the Anunnaki, it raises the question, were they all pointing back to the same event? The role of Enki. These narratives, one figure always seems to stand apart. Enki, among the Anunnaki. Enki is the god of wisdom, water, and creation. He is the one who shapes humanity in other myths, mixing clay with divine essence. He is also the one who bends the rules, who protects mankind when the other gods seem ready to abandon them. By warning Ziusudra of the flood, Enki demonstrates a duality in the Anunnaki. They were not a monolith. Some sought destruction. Others sought preservation. Enki's role ensures that mankind survives, and through him, the Sumerians perhaps saw hope that even in the face of divine wrath, compassion could prevail. Lessons of the flood. The flood myth is not only about destruction, it is about survival. The vessel that carries Ziusudra, Utnapishtim, or Noah, becomes a symbol of endurance. Humanity may be fragile, but it carries within it the spark to rebuild, even after the world is washed clean. For the Sumerians, the flood was a reminder of humility. It showed that the Anunnaki controlled the fate of mankind. Yet it also offered reassurance. If one listened, if one obeyed, survival was possible. For us today, the flood story still whispers of ancient fears and hopes. It suggests that our ancestors remembered or believed. They remembered a time when everything was nearly lost. And it shows how deeply interconnected our myths truly are. A sleep-friendly reflection now. Let us step back from the roaring waters and return to calm. Picture the rivers of Mesopotamia, flowing gently in the moonlight. Imagine the farmers watching the banks carefully, hoping for fertility, but fearing the flood. The Anunnaki loom in the background of this landscape, powerful, unpredictable, yet strangely human in their decisions. The flood, whether literal or symbolic, becomes part of our collective memory, passed from Sumerian tablet to epic poem, from ancient scroll to bedtime story. And as we drift through history, the sound of rushing water fades into the distance. What remains is the lesson that humanity has endured again and again through catastrophe, that even when the world seems ready to drown us, there will always be a vessel, a spark of hope, and the will to survive. Chapter 9: The Anunnaki and the Tower of Babel. There are stories that linger in our collective imagination, stories that feel both familiar and strange, like echoes of something we half remember. One such tale is the story of the Tower of Babel. Most people know it from the Bible. Humanity, united by a single language, decides to build a tower so tall it reaches the heavens. The Lord, displeased, scatters the people and confuses their speech, giving birth to the many languages of the world. But what if this story, like so many others, has deeper roots? What if it carries within it not only a lesson about pride, but also a faint memory of the Anunnaki, the mysterious beings who, in Sumerian lore, shaped the destiny of humankind? Let us step gently into this chapter, letting curiosity be our guide, as we explore the connections between the Anunnaki ancient temples and the enduring mystery of the Tower of Babel. The setting, Mesopotamia. The story of Babel unfolds on the plains of Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization. Here, between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, the Sumerians, Akkadians, and Babylonians built cities of breathtaking ambition. Uruk, Babylon. Among their most remarkable structures were ziggurats, massive stepped towers that rose like mountains from the flat earth. These were not simple temples, but cosmic symbols, meant to bridge the gap between heaven and earth. At the summit of each ziggurat was a shrine, a place where the gods could descend and dwell among mortals. To stand at the base of one of these structures was to feel the presence of the divine. To climb to the top was to approach the sky itself. It is here, among these monuments, that the roots of the Tower of Babel's story take hold. Ziggurats and the Anunnaki in Sumerian belief. The Anunnaki were not distant deities who lived only in some unreachable paradise. They walked among humans, ruled from cities, and made their homes in these towering ziggurats. Each city was said to be the dwelling place of a particular god or goddess. The ziggurat was not simply built for worship, it was a literal residence, a landing platform of sorts, where heaven touched earth. The Sumerians named these structures with poetic precision. The ziggurat of Babylon was called E-Temen-Enki, which translates as House of the Foundation of Heaven and Earth. It is hard not to hear in that name the ambition of Babel, a tower that reaches the skies, a bridge to the divine. If the Anunnaki were indeed real, perhaps the ziggurats were more than symbolic. Some have suggested they could have served as communication points, observation platforms, or even places where gods descended in their skyboats. To the Sumerians at least, the ziggurat was the closest thing to touching the realm of the Anunnaki. The biblical story reimagined. Now let us turn to the biblical version. The book of Genesis tells us, "Now the whole earth had one language, and the same words. And they said, 'Come, let us build ourselves a city, and a tower, with its top in the heavens. And let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered over the face of the whole earth.' But the Lord descends, sees what they are building, and says, 'Behold, they are one people, and they all have one language, and this is only the beginning of what they will do. Nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language, so that they may not understand one another's speech.' And so, the people are scattered, the tower unfinished, the dream of unity broken. At first glance, this is a story about divine punishment for human pride. But if we place it against the backdrop of Sumerian lore, another interpretation emerges. What if the Lord here was not a single deity but the council of the Anunnaki? What if humanity's ambition to build a tower into the heavens was not seen as worship, but as encroachment and attempt to reach, or perhaps even rival the gods themselves? In that light, the scattering of languages becomes not just a punishment, but a deliberate act of control. If humanity could no longer communicate easily, it would no longer unite so easily. Division ensured dependence. Language has power. The idea of the gods confounding human speech is profound. For the Sumerians, writing was a sacred gift. Cuneiform, the earliest system of writing, was not invented for poetry or stories. It was first used for keeping records, for maintaining order, for ensuring the structures of civilization. To control language was to control reality. If the Anunnaki gave humanity the gift of writing, might they also have reserved the right to limit how far human communication could go? The Tower of Babel, then, becomes a story not just about pride, but about boundaries enforced by the Anunnaki to keep mankind within its place. Echoes of a lost unity. What makes the Babel story so intriguing is the idea of a time when humanity was one language, one people, one vision. Archaeologists tell us that early Mesopotamian city-states did share cultural and linguistic similarities. Perhaps there was once a period when communication flowed freely, when trade and ideas spread without barriers. Could the memory of this unity have survived in myth, later reframed as a divine disruption? Or, more tantalizingly, could there have been an age before recorded history, an age when humanity truly was united, under the guidance or watch of beings like the Anunnaki? If so, the Tower of Babel may not just be a myth about a building, but about the breaking of that age. A turning point when unity was lost, and division became the new condition of mankind. The tower as a symbol. On another level, the Tower of Babel can be seen as a symbol of human striving. From the moment we stood upright, we have sought to reach higher, to climb mountains, to build monuments, to pierce the heavens with our imagination. The ziggurats of Mesopotamia, the pyramids of Egypt, the temples of the Maya all seem to echo this same desire. Humanity longs for connection with the sky, with the divine. The Tower of Babel simply places this longing into a single, dramatic narrative. The Anunnaki in this telling are the guardians of that boundary. They allow us to build, but only so high. They grant us knowledge, but only so much. They step in when the balance tilts too far. Sleep-friendly reflection now. As we let the story settle, let us imagine the plains of Mesopotamia at dusk. The ziggurat rises in the fading light, its steps leading upward like a stairway to the stars. At the top, a shrine waits, a quiet place where heaven might meet earth. In the distance, you hear voices, many voices. Some speak the same tongue, others do not. Confusion reigns, yet the will to build remains. Humanity, scattered though it may be, never stops reaching upward. The Tower of Babel is gone, but the dream it represents lives on. It is a dream of connection, of unity, of touching something greater than ourselves. The Anunnaki may have set limits, but the human heart has always sought to climb beyond them. And so, as you drift deeper into this tale, remember that the story of Babel is not just about loss. It is about longing. It is about the eternal dance between humanity and the divine. Chapter 10. The Anunnaki and the Birth of Kingship. There are moments in human history when something entirely new appears. A shift so profound that it changes not just how people live, but how they understand themselves. One such shift was the birth of kingship, an idea that one man, and later one dynasty, could rule not only a city, but also the destiny of its people. The Sumerians, the world's first urban society, tell us something fascinating. They believed kingship did not arise from human ambition alone. They believed it was a gift, or perhaps a command, handed down by the gods themselves. And among those gods were the Anunnaki. Tonight, we step into the ancient world to uncover how the Anunnaki were tied to the very origins of kingship, and how the crown, the throne, and the scepter became symbols not only of power, but of divine favor. The Sumerian king list. Our journey begins with one of the strangest and most intriguing documents of antiquity, the Sumerian king list. carved onto clay tablets thousands of years ago. This text does not read like a simple chronicle. Instead, it combines myth, history, and legend in a way that blurs the line between fact and story. It begins with a dramatic proclamation. After kingship descended from heaven, it was in Eridu. That phrase, kingship descended from heaven, is the key to the Sumerians. Kingship was not invented by humans. It was bestowed by higher beings. The very first kings were chosen under the watchful eyes of the Anunnaki. The list goes on to describe rulers whose reigns lasted not decades, but thousands of years. Kings who lived so long, they seem more like immortals than men. Some scholars believe these exaggerated numbers hide astronomical or symbolic meanings. Others suggest they echo a memory of a time when divine beings, perhaps the Anunnaki themselves, walked among mortals and ruled directly. When the flood, the great deluge, remembered in so many cultures, swept across the world, the king list tells us kingship was once again handed down. From city to city, from dynasty to dynasty, kingship was lowered from heaven as though it were an object, a mantle, a sacred authority that only the gods could give. Kings as shepherds of the gods. In the language of Sumer, a king was not just a ruler. He was often called the shepherd of his people, term rich with meaning. Just as a shepherd guided and protected a flock, the king was expected to guide humanity on behalf of the gods. But who were these gods? The answer leads us back to the Anunnaki. Every city had its patron deity, believed to dwell in its great temple, or ziggurat. But the king was not only a servant of one god. He was a mediator between humanity and the entire divine council. He was, in essence, a chosen representative of the Anunnaki. The king's authority was sacred, yet it was also conditional. He had to maintain justice, ensure proper worship, and keep harmony between heaven and earth. If he failed, famine, drought, or invasion might follow, for the gods' favor was not guaranteed forever. The first kings of Eridu and Uruk. Let us walk briefly through those ancient names. Eridu, said to be the first city, was ruled by Enlil, the first king in the Sumerian king list. His reign, according to the tablets, lasted 28,800 years. Impossible for a human, but perhaps not impossible for a being touched by the Anunnaki. Later came rulers of Uruk, among them the legendary Gilgamesh, who we will meet again in later chapters. Gilgamesh was remembered as two-thirds divine, mortal, a hero who sought immortality and wrestled with the limits of human life. His kingship, like that of others, was portrayed as sanctioned by the gods, a continuation of this heavenly descent. Kingship, as technologists, we step outside the myth for a moment and think practically. We might ask, why kingship? Why not remain as tribes, clans, or councils? Here lies the deeper mystery. Kingship itself can be thought of as a kind of technology, not of stone or bronze, but of organization and control. To coordinate thousands of people, to build temples, canals, and cities, required central authority. Without it, the great civilizations of Mesopotamia could not have existed. Did the Anunnaki, then, bestow kingship as a way of guiding human society into complexity? Was it their method of ensuring that humanity could be managed, taught, and perhaps prepared for something greater? In this sense, kingship becomes more than power. It becomes a system, a framework imposed by beings who were shaping the destiny of mankind. Rituals of coronation. To understand how sacred kingship was, we must look at the coronation rituals. When a king ascended the throne, it was not simply a political event. It was a cosmic act. The king would often be led into the temple of the city's chief deity, where he would receive the symbols of authority: the scepter, a rod of command; the crown, often horned, symbolizing divine power; the throne, the seat of rule. These were not mere ornaments. They were believed to carry the essence of kingship itself, the invisible thread linking the ruler to the gods. Priests would perform rituals. Sacrifices would be made, and hymns would be sung that spoke of the king as chosen, beloved, and guided by the Nunnaki. To the people, the king was no ordinary man. He was the living bridge between heaven and earth, the fragility of divine favor, yet kingship was never secure. For every hymn praising a ruler, there are also laments of cities destroyed, dynasties overthrown, and kings cast down. The Anunnaki gave kingship, but they could also withdraw it. When a city fell, it was not seen merely as military defeat. It was interpreted as the gods abandoning that city. This sense of divine fragility gave kingship a solemn weight. The king was powerful, yes, but he was also under constant scrutiny. His failures could doom not just himself, but his entire people. The human side of kingship, and yet, behind the divine imagery, we can imagine the human side of kingship. These were men who faced impossible burdens. They had to feed thousands, lead armies, settle disputes, and maintain the favor of beings far greater than themselves. One can imagine a king standing on the ziggurat at night, gazing at the stars, wondering whether the Anunnaki were pleased or displeased. Did he feel himself a servant, or a pawn, or something in between? The king list makes kings seem eternal, but in truth, they were mortal men, fragile and uncertain, caught in a game where the stakes were cosmic. Reflections for sleep. As we close this chapter, imagine the city of Ur at night. The moon shines down on whitewashed walls, on canals that glitter like silver ribbons. At the heart of the city rises the great ziggurat, tier upon tier, its steps leading upward to the temple at its summit. Inside, the king kneels before the statue of the city's god. He has been crowned, scepter in hand, throne awaiting him. But in his heart, he knows that his power is borrowed, not owned. It comes from beyond. It comes from the Anunnaki. The people sleep, secure under his rule, believing that as long as the king is favored, they too will be blessed. Kingship has descended from heaven, but heaven can always take it back. Chapter 11. The Anunnaki and the Secrets of the Underworld. In the lands of ancient Mesopotamia, death was not an end, but a passage. The living world and the world beneath were connected by invisible doors. The people of Sumer, Akkad, and Babylon believed that, after death, souls descended into a realm beneath the earth, the underworld. But here lies the mystery. The underworld was not abandoned, nor was it ruled by shadow alone. The Anunnaki themselves, those ancient gods who shaped humanity, were also said to dwell in this hidden domain. Some watched over the heavens, some guided the earth, but others, perhaps the most secretive of all, kept their thrones beneath the soil, among dust and silence. Tonight, we step carefully into the realm of shadows to explore how the Anunnaki were tied to the mysteries of death, judgment, and the unseen world that lies beneath our feet. The Mesopotamian underworld. The Mesopotamians called the underworld by many names: Kur, Ur-Kala, or simply the Great Below. It was not a fiery hell of punishment, nor a paradise of reward. Instead, it was a vast, dusty realm where all souls eventually went, no matter how great or small. Kings, farmers, warriors, children each entered the same shadowed gates and passed into the same silence. The dead were said to eat dust and clay. Their voices were whispers. The rivers that once nourished them on earth became dry trickles in the land beneath. Yet the underworld was not without rulers, and it was certainly not without order. Ereshkigal, the Queen Belat, the heart of the underworld, stood Ereshkigal, the queen of the Great Below. She was the sister of Inanna, the goddess of love and war, and her throne was said to be unshakable. But she did not rule alone. By her side, in shadowy halls, were the Anunnaki of the underworld. These were not the same figures who moved among the heavens or bestowed kingship upon mankind. These were the judges, the watchers, the ones who saw to it that no soul could escape once the gates had closed. In Mesopotamian hymns, the Anunnaki of the underworld are described as stern and unyielding. They sit upon their seats of judgment, deciding the fate of the dead. No bribes can sway them, no prayers can soften their decrees. Their justice is as cold as stone. The descent of In-Ana-Wone of the most haunting myths reveals the role of the Anunnaki in this realm, the descent of In-Ana-Dot in this story. Inanna, goddess of the heavens, chooses to descend into her sister's domain. She dresses herself in 7 layers of power robes, jewels, and symbols of authority, and approaches the gates of the underworld. At each gate, the guardians strip her of one item, until, at last, she stands naked before Ereshkigal. The moment she enters, the Anunnaki of the underworld rise from their seats. They fix their gaze upon her. Their eyes are said to be like death itself, and with one look, Inanna is struck down. She hangs lifeless, her body nailed to a hook. For 3 days and nights, the world above mourns her absence. Crops fail, animals refuse to breed. Love itself seems to vanish. Only through trickery and intervention does she return. But the story leaves an indelible truth. The Anunnaki of the underworld had the power to strike even a goddess dead. Judgment. And the balance of souls. What role did the Anunnaki truly play beneath the earth? Texts suggest that they were judges, weighing the deeds of mortals. Unlike later concepts of heaven and hell, their judgments did not separate souls into eternal joy or torment. Instead, they confirmed each person's place in the shadowy hierarchy of the dead. A mighty king might sit on a raised platform. A poor farmer might crouch in the dust. The arrangement mirrored life, but in muted tones, as though the afterlife were a reflection of the world above, only stripped of light and joy. This cold justice reminds us of one of the Anunnaki's greatest qualities. They were not sentimental. They upheld order, cosmic, social, eternal. To them, balance mattered more than mercy. Offerings to the dead. The living knew this and sought to care for their ancestors through offerings. Families brought bread, water, and beer to tombs, hoping that their loved ones would not go hungry in the dust. Without such care, spirits might grow restless, wandering back into the land of the living as shades. Here again, the Anunnaki were believed to be watching. They oversaw not just the souls of the dead, but also the flow of offerings that sustained them, through ritual and remembrance. The living maintained their fragile bond with the underworld. The gates of Kur-Imagine, for a moment, standing before the gates of Kur, massive doors of bronze, guarded by demons whose faces are half human, half beast. The air is heavy, as if the weight of earth itself presses down upon you. Behind these gates, the Anunnaki sit in their halls of judgment. Their voices echo like distant thunder. One by one, the dead pass through, never to return. The gates close with a sound like finality, and in that moment, the soul becomes part of the great below. The duality of the Anunnaki. What makes the role of the Anunnaki in the underworld so fascinating is their duality. Above the earth, they were bringers of kingship, law, and cosmic order. They granted the crown, raised temples, and guided humanity's growth. But beneath the earth, they were implacable judges, silent overseers of death. They revealed the truth that power and life itself are temporary. No matter how high a king rose, no matter how great his armies, in the end, he too must kneel before the Anunnaki of the underworld. This duality, life and death, crown and graveship, that's why the Anunnaki loomed so large in the minds of the Mesopotamians. They were not only gods of creation, they were guardians of endings. A sleep reflection. As you drift now, imagine walking through an ancient city at dusk. The torches flicker, the temple bells ring. Somewhere, a priest whispers prayers for the dead, sending offerings to the great. Below. Far beneath the ground, the Anunnaki sit in silence, their faces carved in shadow. They do not speak unless judgment is needed. They do not move unless balance is broken. The underworld is not cruel, nor is it kind. It simply is. A place where all journeys end, where even the gods themselves once bowed. And in that silence, perhaps there is a kind of peace. Chapter 12. The Anunnaki and the Towering Ziggurats. When you wander across the deserts of ancient Mesopotamia, rising above the flat earth, you might see them massive stepped towers reaching into the skies. They are not mountains of stone, shaped by nature, but creations of human hands. Their name echoes through time, ziggurats. These towering structures were not merely temples. They were ladders between the human world and the divine, bridges of brick and faith that connected mankind to the Anunnaki themselves. Tonight, we will climb these ancient steps together, slowly, gently, as though carried by dreams. We will explore the mysteries of the ziggurats, their purpose, their secrets, and the role of the Anunnaki who watched over them. The birth of the ziggurat. The story begins with clay in Mesopotamia. There was little stone and little wood, but the land between the Tigris and Euphrates was rich in silt. Clay became the lifeblood of civilization. With it, the Mesopotamians built homes, palaces, and eventually, the mighty ziggurats. Each ziggurat began as a platform, raised high above the earth. As centuries passed, these platforms grew larger and taller, layer upon layer of mud brick, until they formed stepped pyramids that reached for the heavens. Unlike Egyptian pyramids, which housed the dead, ziggurats were homes for the gods. They were meant as earthly anchors for divine presence. And at the heart of this divine presence were the Anunnaki, the connection between heaven and earth. To the people of Mesopotamia, the world was not separate from the divine. The Anunnaki walked among them, guided kingship, blessed harvests, and sent floods when balance was broken. But how could mortals speak with gods who dwelled in the heavens? The ziggurat was the answer. Each level of the tower symbolized a step closer to the realm above. Priests would ascend the stairways, carrying offerings, climbing from earth toward sky, from the dust of men toward the breath of the divine. At the summit stood a small shrine, often gilded, sometimes painted blue to mirror the heavens. Here, it was believed, the Anunnaki could descend, resting for a time among their people. The great ziggurat of yore. Among all these structures, none was as famous as the great ziggurat of Yorebelt, over 4,000 years ago, by King Yornamu. It towered above the city like a man-made mountain. Imagine standing before it, massive staircases, wide enough for processions, leading upward in perfect symmetry. The bricks baked hard in the sun, glowing reddish-brown under the Mesopotamian sky. This ziggurat was dedicated to Nena, the moon god, one of the great Anunnaki. At night, under the shining glow of the moon, priests would ascend its steps, there, chants floating upward like smoke, offering prayers to the divine. For the people below, the sight must have been awe-inspiring. To see their priests climb toward the heavens was to believe that their city was under the watchful gaze of the gods themselves. Rituals upon the heights. But what truly happened at the top of these towers? Texts suggest that rituals were performed, sacrifices made, incense burned. Priests may have entered trance-like states, seeking visions or messages from the Anunnaki. The ziggurat was not a place for the crowds, but for the chosen few priests, kings, and intermediaries who bore the heavy responsibility of speaking for humanity. To the ordinary citizen, the rituals were hidden. All they could see was the smoke drifting down and the knowledge that their offerings were being carried into the hands of the divine. This secrecy only deepened the mystery, for if the Anunnaki truly descended, then the ziggurat was more than a temple. It was a cosmic meeting place. The symbol of power. Ziggurats were not just spiritual, they were political. To build one required thousands of laborers, years of work, and immense resources. Only a king blessed by the Anunnaki could marshal such power. And once the ziggurat stood, it became a visible sign that the gods themselves favored the ruler who commanded its construction. Thus, the ziggurat was both a ladder to the heavens and a throne upon the earth. It united the divine authority of the Anunnaki with the earthly rule of kings. Echoes of the Tower of Babel. The Bible tells of a tower built in Babylon, a tower so high that it threatened to reach heaven itself. This was the Tower of Babel. Many scholars believe the story was inspired by the great ziggurats of Mesopotamia. To later peoples, these structures seemed almost impossible human ambition, stretching too far, daring to climb into the realm of the gods. And if the Anunnaki did indeed dwell upon their heights, perhaps the fear was not misplaced, for to build a ladder to the heavens is to risk angering those who guard its gates. Mysteries beneath the bricks even now. Questions remain. Were the ziggurats purely symbolic, or did the Anunnaki truly descend upon them? Were they points of ritual only, or something more, perhaps even places of communication with beings beyond our world? Some suggest the ziggurats may have acted as cosmic beacons, their stepped design mirroring the stars above, aligning with constellations known to the priests. Could it be that the Anunnaki instructed their construction, guiding humanity to create markers visible not only from Earth, but from the heavens themselves? A sleep reflection as you close your eyes tonight? Imagine climbing one of these ancient towers. Step by step, you rise above the earth. The sounds of the city fade. The night air grows cool. At the summit, beneath the stars, a small shrine waits. You leave an offering of bread, of incense, of whispered prayer, and in the silence, you feel it, a presence, watchful, eternal. Perhaps it is the gaze of the Anunnaki, drawn downward to meet you. The ziggurat is not just a structure of bricks. It is a bridge between dust and divinity, between man and God, between earth and sky, and upon its summit, you stand balanced between both worlds. Chapter 1-3 The Anunnaki and the Sacred Kingship in the Heart of Mesopotamia. The concept of kingship was unlike any other. It was not merely about ruling a people, collecting tribute, or commanding armies. Kingship, to the ancients, was something sacred, something bestowed not by the will of men, but by the hands of the Anunnaki themselves. To wear the crown was to carry divine authority. To sit on the throne was to act as the earthly vessel of the gods. Kingship was not human, it was celestial. It descended from the heavens, and it was said that without the Anunnaki no man could rule. Tonight, let us journey into this idea of sacred kingship. Let us uncover how the Anunnaki shaped rulers, guided empires, and carved their will into the destinies of nations. The divine gift of rule. The Sumerians believed that before cities could be built, before order could exist, the Anunnaki had to first grant the divine decrees that shaped civilization. Among these divine gifts was kingship. It is written in ancient texts that kingship descended from heaven. This phrase was not a metaphor. To the people of Mesopotamia, it was literal. The Anunnaki chose who would rule. Without their blessing, a man might seize power, but he could never truly be a king. Thus, the throne was not merely a seat of governance. It was a sacred trust, a direct connection to the divine. The first kings, the earliest kings of Sumer, were often described as having extraordinary traits. Some were said to have lived for hundreds of years, their reigns stretching beyond normal human lifespans. Others were depicted as part divine, descended from the union of gods and mortals. These accounts hint at a time when the line between human and Anunnaki was blurred, when rulers were not simply men, but beings touched by celestial blood. The king was therefore more than a ruler. He was a mediator standing between the human realm and the Anunnaki, ensuring that balance was maintained. The king, as shepherd, one of the most common titles for Mesopotamian kings, was shepherd. This was no coincidence. To the ancients, the king was not supposed to be a tyrant, but a caretaker. Just as a shepherd guards his flock, guiding them through dangers and leading them to sustenance, so too was the king expected to guide his people. But the shepherd's authority came not from himself, but from the gods who gave him the staff. The Anunnaki had entrusted him with the care of their children, and in return, he owed them loyalty, worship, and obedience. The sacred ritual of coronation. When a new king took the throne, it was not enough for him to simply claim it. He had to be recognized by the Anunnaki. Rituals of coronation often involved the king entering the temple, offering sacrifices, and receiving symbolic items of power. Among these were the scepter, the crown, and the staff, each representing divine authority. It was not the people who crowned him, but the gods. The ceremony was less about human politics and more about aligning the ruler with cosmic order. Kings, as builders for the gods, one of the king's most important duties was the construction and maintenance of temples. The Anunnaki did not need food or drink, yet they required sacred spaces where humans could offer them worship. The king, as their chosen servant, was responsible for ensuring these temples were built, repaired, and honored. A king who neglected this duty risked angering the gods, bringing famine or war upon his land. But a king who built grand temples, ziggurats, shrines, sanctuaries, was believed to secure the favor of the Anunnaki. Thus, architecture became an act of devotion. Stone and brick became prayers made solid. The balance of justice. The king was also the keeper of justice. In Mesopotamian belief, justice was not a human invention. It was a divine principle, handed down by the Anunnaki. To rule unjustly was to defy the cosmic order. Many kings inscribed their laws on stone steles, claiming they had received them directly from the gods. The most famous of these was the Code of Hammurabi, which declared, "The gods called me to cause justice to prevail in the land, to destroy the wicked and the evil, so that the strong may not oppress the weak." To live under a king's rule, then, was to live under the watchful eye of the Anunnaki themselves. Kingship in crisis. But what happened when a king failed? History tells us of rulers who neglected the gods, who grew arrogant, who placed themselves above the Anunnaki. These kings often met tragic ends. Their cities fell to enemies, their people scattered, their names erased from memory. To defy the gods was to invite ruin. For in the Mesopotamian worldview, kingship was never truly human. It could be revoked at any time. And when it was, no army, no wealth, no wall was strong enough to save a fallen king. The living bridge. Perhaps the most fascinating aspect of kingship was the idea that the king was a living bridge. He was flesh and blood, yet his authority came from the stars. He was mortal, yet his crown was eternal. Through him, the Anunnaki guided the fate of nations, and through him, humans could appeal to the heavens. When people prayed, they often prayed through their king. When they offered sacrifices, they trusted their king to deliver them to the gods. In this way, the king became not only a ruler, but a sacred channel through which divine power flowed. A gentle reflection as you drift into thought. Imagine standing before one of these ancient kings. He wears robes of white, his crown gleaming with gold. In one hand, a staff carved from sacred wood. In the other, a tablet etched with laws. Behind him rise the ziggurats, their steps glowing in the sun. Around him, the people bow, trusting him to guard their lives. But above him, unseen yet ever present, stand the Anunnaki, their eyes watching, their will guiding, their judgment ready. The king is not merely a man. He is a chosen vessel, a shepherd of his people, a servant of the gods. And his crown is not made of gold alone, it is woven with the threads of heaven itself. Chapter 14. The Anunnaki and the Flood Myths. Long before the great cities of Mesopotamia rose from the plains, long before kings sat upon thrones or scribes etched words into clay, there was water. Water, endless and unbroken. From this primordial Sea life itself was born, and from its depths came the Anunnaki, who brought order to chaos. But water was not only the beginning, it was also the end. The ancients believed that the same divine forces that shaped the world could just as easily sweep it away, and in their stories, the Anunnaki were often at the center of a terrifying decision: to unleash a flood so vast so merciless that it would wipe away nearly all of humankind. Tonight, let us drift into these myths of deluge, destruction, and survival. Let us explore how the Anunnaki used water to cleanse, to punish, and to renew the world. The first whisper of the flood, the earliest echoes of the flood come from Sumer, etched into clay, thousands of years before the Bible was written. In these myths humanity had multiplied, spreading across the earth. But with growth came noise, disorder, and rebellion. The Anunnaki, burdened by the clamor of mankind, gathered in council. Some gods felt compassion for humans. Others seethed with anger, believing mortals had overstepped their bounds. It was then that the idea took form, a flood, vast and relentless, to silence the chaos. The decision was not unanimous. Among the Anunnaki, there was conflict: mercy against judgment, preservation against destruction. Enlil's wrath in many accounts. It was Enlil, the powerful god of air and storms, who pushed hardest for the flood. Enlil was often depicted as stern, commanding, intolerant of human insolence. To him, mankind had become too loud, too troublesome, too ungrateful. He sought to wipe them out, to cleanse the earth with water, and to start anew. Yet even as he plotted destruction, another figure rose in quiet defiance. Enki, Lord of wisdom and the deep waters, could not bear the thought of humanity's extinction. He was, after all, the one who had guided their creation, teaching them survival, granting them knowledge. To watch them drown in silence was unthinkable, and so, Enki whispered a warning. The most famous of these warnings was given to Zeus, pious king and priest. In dreams, Enki spoke to him, instructing him to build a vessel, a great boat sealed with pitch and made strong against the rising waters. Ziusudra listened, he built, and when the rains came, he and his family survived, while the rest of the world was swallowed. The deluge, the flood itself, was described as relentless. Rain poured for days upon days. Rivers swelled beyond their banks. The Tigris and Euphrates raged like wild beasts, devouring fields, homes, and cities. The world was reduced to an endless ocean. Humanity's great works, its temples and palaces, were swept away as though they had never been. Above it all, the Anunnaki watched. Some rejoiced at the silence of a cleansed earth. Others mourned at the destruction of the children they had once guided. The aftermath: when the waters receded, Ziusudra emerged from his vessel. He offered sacrifices to the gods, burning incense, pouring libations, thanking Enki for his mercy. It was then that the Anunnaki gathered once more. Enlil raged at first, furious that a mortal had survived. But Enki argued that humanity was meant to endure, that the flood was not the end, but a lesson. At last the gods relented. Ziusudra was granted eternal life, becoming a bridge between man and the divine, a reminder of the day when the Anunnaki remade the world with water. Echoes in later myths. The story of Ziusudra did not end in Sumer. It spread, changing form as it traveled. In Babylon, the survivor was called Utnapishtim, appearing in the Epic of Gilgamesh. In Hebrew tradition, he became Noah, building his ark to weather the storm. Though names shifted, the essence remained. The gods, displeased with humanity, sent a flood to cleanse the earth. One chosen man was spared, guided by divine wisdom, to begin anew. It is a story that resonates across cultures, across centuries, whispering of both destruction and renewal. The meaning of the flood. Why did the ancients tell this story? For some, it was a warning. Human pride, noise, and rebellion would not go unpunished. The Anunnaki demanded respect, and if humanity forgot its place, the flood would come again. For others, it was a reminder of mercy. Even in the darkest judgment, a spark of compassion remained. Enki's whisper ensured survival, teaching that wisdom and faith could preserve life against overwhelming odds. The flood was both terror and hope, an ending and a beginning. The river's memory: to live in Mesopotamia was to live with waters, dual nature. The rivers brought life, flooding fields with rich silt, nourishing crops, sustaining cities. But the rivers could also turn violent, rising without warning, sweeping away homes, drowning entire villages. Perhaps it was this lived reality that gave birth to the flood myths. The people saw in the waters both the hand of creation and the hand of destruction, and in the Anunnaki, they found a face for that power. A gentle reflection. Close your eyes and picture the scene. The sky darkens, thunder rolls, and rain begins to fall. At first, it is welcome, refreshing the dry earth, but soon it grows relentless, a pounding rhythm that does not cease. Rivers swell, waves rise, and the land disappears beneath endless water. Amid the chaos, a single boat drifts. Inside, a family huddles in silence, listening to the storm rage outside. They are afraid, but they are alive, guided by the wisdom of a god who whispered to them in dreams. When at last the clouds part, and the first rays of sun gleam across the still waters, they know the world has changed. They know they are the beginning of something new. The flood has ended, but its story will never be forgotten. Chapter 15. Blood, Sacrifice, and the Gods. The Anunnaki's dark bargains. When we think of gods, we imagine beings of light, wisdom, and mercy. But in the shadows of ancient Mesopotamia, a darker truth emerges, one that whispers of rituals, soaked in blood, offerings of flesh, and a divine hunger that demanded the lifeblood of mortals. The Anunnaki were not worshipped with gentle hymns alone. Their altars demanded something more primal, something terrifying. Tonight, we confront the dark bargains of sacrifice, the chilling relationship between humanity and their otherworldly masters, the logic of sacrifice. Why did the ancients believe that gods required offerings of blood? Food, grain, incense, and wine were common gifts, but woven through the myths is a more unsettling idea, that the lifeblood of animals, and perhaps even humans, fed the gods in some mysterious way. Blood was life. To spill it was to release vitality, the essence of being. For humans, giving it was the ultimate form of submission. For the gods, receiving it was power. Was this symbolic ritual, or evidence of something darker? Did the Anunnaki consume these offerings in ways beyond human comprehension? Enlil and the wrath of the gods. The myths reveal a god quick to wrath. Enlil, chief among the Anunnaki. When humans multiplied and their noise grew unbearable, Enlil unleashed famine, drought, and pestilence. When even that failed to silence them, he decreed the great flood to wipe them away. Enlil's punishments were not only cosmic, they were also personal. He demanded obedience, and when it faltered, the cost was suffering and death. Sacrifices, then, may not have been mere offerings, but appeasements, desperate bargains to quiet the fury of a god who saw humans as tools, not equals. Temples as feeding grounds. Every Mesopotamian city revolved around its ziggurat and temple complex, the dwelling place of its patron deity. Priests were not simply caretakers of faith. They were intermediaries in an economy of offerings. Daily, sacrifices were prepared, animals slaughtered, blood drained, and meat roasted upon the sacred fires. The smoke rose to the heavens, described in the texts as a pleasing aroma to the gods. But what if this was not metaphor? Could the Anunnaki have required something material from these rituals? Energy, sustenance, even genetic material? Some scholars point to the detail of blood and organs being carefully separated, as if for specific purpose. If these rituals were echoes of forgotten contact, they may not have been symbolic at all, but practical, a system of collection, human sacrifice. The forbidden offering. Though most Mesopotamian rituals involved animals, there are disturbing hints of something more: the sacrifice of humans. Clay tablets tell of rituals where royal blood was shed to sanctify kingship. In other myths, entire populations were cursed and destroyed to satisfy divine wrath. Archaeological sites across the ancient world show the practice of human sacrifice. Could this tradition, found in Sumer, Akkad, and beyond, have originated from the demands of the Anunnaki themselves. If humans were created as servants, was it so unthinkable that their lives could also be currency, a final, terrible gift to appease the gods? Echoes in the Epic of Gilgamesh. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, when Enkidu dies, Gilgamesh grieves and rages against the gods. Why must mortals die, while the gods feast and thrive eternally? The text suggests that humanity was destined to be mortal, their blood, their toil, their very existence serving divine purposes. The story of the flood reinforces this. When the gods realized that they had destroyed too much, they regretted it, not out of compassion, but because they had lost their sacrifices, their offerings. Without humans, who would feed them? This paints a chilling picture. Humans as livestock, necessary for the gods' survival. Their blood and devotion sustaining the Anunnaki. Parallels across cultures. The idea of blood sacrifice is not confined to Mesopotamia. Across the globe, civilizations tell of gods who demanded offerings of life. In Mesoamerica, the Aztecs cut open chests to feed the sun with human hearts. In the Bible, Yahweh tests Abraham, demanding the sacrifice of his son. In Greece, blood offerings were made at altars to appease the Olympians. Are these cultural coincidences, or memories of a shared truth, passed down from the earliest human-god interactions with the Anunnaki? The chilling consistency suggests not imagination, but inheritance, a dark legacy of sacrifice stretching back to Sumer. Blood as technology. What if the Anunnaki's demand for blood was not spiritual at all, but technological? Blood carries DNA, stem cells, and bioenergetic properties. To an advanced species, human blood may have been a resource, raw material for experimentation, healing, or even sustenance. This theory casts sacrifice in a new light, not worship, but extraction. Temples as collection centers, priests as managers of supply, humanity feeding its masters with the very essence of life. Could this explain why kingship was tied to bloodlines? Why rulers were seen as half-divine? Perhaps the gods needed royal blood not for symbolism, but for purity, a genetic connection that preserved their experiments. The priests and their secrets. The priesthood in Mesopotamia was powerful, second only to kings. Their rituals were complex, guarded, and often hidden from the public. What secrets did they keep? Were they simply preserving tradition, or were they carrying out protocols given directly by the Anunnaki? The secrecy of blood rituals suggests there was more at stake than belief. These ceremonies may have hidden processes too dangerous, too shocking, for common eyes. Perhaps the priests were the true intermediaries, caretakers not of faith, but of an ancient contract between humanity and gods. Fear, as control sacrifice was not only about feeding the gods, it was also about controlling humans. If the gods could unleash famine, plague, or flood at will, then sacrifice became a desperate insurance, a way to buy safety. Fear bound humans to temples, to kings, and to gods. Sacrifice was both worship and tax, the price of survival in a world where divine wrath was only a heartbeat away. The price of defiance. Myths also tell of what happened when humans or kings refused sacrifice. Cities were cursed, armies destroyed, plagues swept through the land. One story tells of King Lugalbanda, who defied ritual and was struck with sickness until he submitted. Another warns of temples burned when offerings ceased. The lesson was clear. Without sacrifice, humans faced annihilation. The gods could not be denied. A chilling possibility. What if humanity was never meant to be free? What if the rituals of blood were not superstition, but binding contracts written in flesh? The Anunnaki may have engineered humanity not only to work, but to feed them biologically, energetically, or both. Sacrifice ensured a steady supply. Fear ensured compliance. And those who resisted were destroyed. Closing reflections. The story of sacrifice is the story of humanity's submission. in temples filled with smoke and blood. Humans offered their lives, and the lives of their kin, to beings who walked as gods. Were the Anunnaki truly divine, or were they masters extracting resources from their creations? Were sacrifices gifts of devotion, or payments in a system of cosmic slavery? Perhaps both. Perhaps worship and exploitation were two sides of the same coin, woven into the DNA of civilization itself. As we move forward, one thing is clear. The Anunnaki's reign was not only about knowledge, but about control. They gave with one hand and demanded with the other, and in the darkest chambers of their temples, the lifeblood of humanity flowed as tribute to the gods. In the next chapter, we will explore the ultimate question of mortality. Did the Anunnaki control the secret of life and death itself? Were they keepers of immortality, granting it to a chosen few, while denying it to mankind? The search for eternal life awaits us in Chapter 16. Chapter 16: Immortality, the Gods, and the Human Struggle for Eternal Life. From the beginning of recorded history, one truth has haunted humanity. We die, and the gods do not. This cruel divide separates mortals from the divine, fueling myths, rituals, and desperate quests that echo across time. In the world of the Anunnaki, this divide was sharper, more brutal, and perhaps more real than anywhere else. The gods lived for thousands of years, unaging, unchanging, while humans withered and perished in fleeting spans. But was immortality truly theirs? And if so, what prevented them from sharing it? Did the Anunnaki hold the key to eternal life, and deliberately keep it hidden? Tonight, we peel back the shadows of myth and mystery to uncover mankind's greatest obsession, the secret of immortality. The immortal gods in Mesopotamian texts. The gods are described as ageless. They could be wounded, even killed, under rare circumstances, but age itself never claimed them. Kings lived for decades, men and women for less. But the gods, their reign stretched into millennia. Their names echoed across generations like monuments that never crumbled. The Sumerian king list records kings ruling for thousands of years before the Great Flood. Reigns so long that they cannot be dismissed as ordinary human lives. Were these kings simply mythical inventions, or were they hybrids, rulers infused with divine blood, inheriting fragments of Anunnaki longevity? This is the first crack in the wall, a clue that immortality was not myth, but reality, jealously guarded by those who ruled from the heavens. The Epic of Gilgamesh, a man's rage against death. No story captures this struggle better than the Epic of Gilgamesh, the world's first great tale. Gilgamesh, king of Uruk, was 2/3 divine, 1/3 human. His strength was unmatched, his mind relentless. Yet when his beloved companion Enkidu died, Gilgamesh was forced to confront the truth. Even demigods must fall, haunted by death. Gilgamesh set out on a desperate quest to find the secret of eternal life. He crossed oceans, faced monstrous guardians, and entered the realm of Utnapishtim, the survivor of the flood, granted immortality by the gods. There, Gilgamesh begged for the gift of eternal life, but he was denied. Mortality, Utnapishtim told him, was the fate of mankind. Immortality was reserved for the gods, and yet there was hope, a plant hidden deep beneath the waters that could restore youth. Gilgamesh found it. For a moment, victory was his. But as he bathed, a serpent stole it from him, slithering away with the prize. This was no accident. It was myth as metaphor, warning as history. Mankind may glimpse immortality, but it will always be taken away. The serpent and the secret of renewal, the serpent that stole Gilgamesh's prize, is no ordinary creature. In Mesopotamian lore, serpents are symbols of rebirth, of shedding old skins and emerging renewed. But in this myth, the serpent is also a thief, stealing life from humanity. Could this serpent be more than a symbol? Could it represent the gods themselves, the Anunnaki, Who withheld the gift of eternal youth? What if immortality was not only possible, but once within humanity's grasp, only to be stolen away? The serpent's theft echoes across cultures. In the Bible, the serpent in Eden tempts mankind with forbidden knowledge, but the path to eternal life is blocked by divine command, again and again. The message is the same: the gods control immortality, and humanity must not touch it. Technology of the gods. How could the Anunnaki live so long? Myth may cloak it in symbols, but modern minds see another possibility: technology. If they were flesh and blood beings from beyond, their lifespans may have been extended through advanced science, genetic manipulation, cellular regeneration, or technologies we cannot yet imagine. This technology may explain the great spans of life attributed to ancient kings and gods. It may also explain the obsession with bloodlines. If divine blood carried the secret to longevity, preserving it became paramount. This casts royal genealogies in a new light. They were not only records of power, but of biology, a sacred heritage tied not only to rule, but to life itself. Immortality as control. Why deny humanity eternal life? Why keep this power locked away? The answer may be control. Mortals who know they will die are mortals who can be ruled. Fear of death breeds obedience. It keeps temples filled, sacrifices flowing, and kings powerful. If humans were immortal, the gods would lose their leverage. The cycle of worship, fear, and dependence would break. To keep their order, the Anunnaki may have withheld what they themselves enjoyed: endless years unbound by death. Echoes in other myths. The denial of immortality is not unique to Mesopotamia. Across cultures, the theme recurs like an unbroken chain. In Greece, humans are denied ambrosia and nectar, the food of the gods that grants eternal life. In the Bible, Adam and Eve are expelled from Eden, specifically to prevent them from eating the fruit of life. In Hindu myths, the gods churn the ocean to obtain Amrita, the nectar of immortality, guarded fiercely against demons and mortals alike. Different lands, different tongues, but the same story. Immortality is close, yet forbidden. This consistency suggests more than coincidence. It suggests memory, a shared inheritance from encounters with beings who controlled life itself. The price of seeking eternal life. Gilgamesh was not the only one to chase immortality. Kings and rulers across history sought the elixir of life, divine favor, or mystical plants said to grant unending years. In many cases, these quests ended in tragedy. Those who sought what was forbidden were punished, cursed, or destroyed. The message was clear: mortality is the boundary you cannot cross. And yet, humanity never stopped trying. Even today, we chase longevity through medicine, science, and technology. Echoing the quest begun in the shadow of the Anunnaki. Were there exceptions? But were there mortals who succeeded? The myths suggest there were. Utna, Pesa, survivor of the flood, was granted eternal life, a rare exception, a reward for obedience and survival. His story may be unique, or it may hint at something greater, that the gods could bestow immortality when they chose. If so, the key was not impossibility, but permission. Immortality was real, but conditional, a gift the Anunnaki gave sparingly, keeping its power to themselves. The human cost, the struggle for immortality, is not only about time, it is about meaning. To know that the gods live forever, while humans perish, is to live in despair. Myths are filled with lamentations, cries to the heavens, pleas for more years. Humanity's short span was seen not as natural, but as cruelly imposed. This despair became fuel for religion, ritual, and obedience. In the face of death, humans clung tighter to gods who could never die. Was this the ultimate manipulation? A system designed to keep mankind forever beneath their creators. A dark inheritance even today, the shadow of this struggle lingers. We dream of immortality through science, technology, and transhumanism. We explore genetics, cryonics, and artificial intelligence, searching for the key that was denied to us in ancient times. Perhaps we are not inventing these quests anew. Perhaps we are remembering. The desire may be encoded in us, passed down from ancestors who once stood before the Anunnaki and begged for life without end. If so, the denial of immortality is not only history, it is the wound at the heart of humanity. Closing reflections. The Anunnaki gave humanity knowledge, civilization, and kingship, but they withheld the one gift that would make us their equals, immortality. Instead, they dangled it before us, like a prize, only to snatch it away. The Epic of Gilgamesh is not just a story, it is humanity's eternal lament, our rage against the cage of death. And yet, the very persistence of this rage suggests something deeper. Could it be that the secret of eternal life is not lost, but hidden, that humanity was meant to rediscover it, to reclaim what was stolen? In the next chapter, we will explore this question further. Did the Anunnaki's manipulation of human DNA hold the key not only to our creation, but to our mortality itself? Were we designed to die, or was immortality written in our blood and locked away by the hands of gods? Chapter 17. DNA, Creation, and the Curse of Mortality. From the beginning, the Anunnaki were more than gods of myth. They were creators. They shaped mankind, not out of kindness, but necessity. They engineered us as workers, servants, subjects, to fill the endless hunger of their empires. But what if this act of creation was not a gift, but a curse? What if, buried within the fabric of our DNA, they encoded a prison mortality itself? Tonight, we dive deep into the most unsettling possibility of all, that the Anunnaki designed us to die. The engineered origin of humanity. Ancient Sumerian texts speak clearly. The Anunnaki created mankind, not from clay alone, but from the mingling of their divine essence with the raw matter of the earth. The Atrahasis epic tells the story. The lesser gods, forced into endless labor, rebelled. Enki the trickster and scientist of the divine offered a solution: create new beings who could carry the burden of toil, with clay and the blood of a slain god. The first humans were born, not as equals, but as workers. Their fate was decided before their first breath. This is no metaphor. To modern ears, it sounds strikingly like genetic engineering, a fusion of alien DNA with terrestrial material, resulting in a new species, humanity. But why stop there? If the Anunnaki had such power, what else could they encode into us? The programming of death DNA is more than a blueprint. It is a script. It carries instructions, not only for life, but for death. Within every cell lies a biological clock. Our telomeres shorten as we age. Our cells replicate, then falter, then fail. This is not random. It is programmed. What if this programming was not natural? What if it was imposed? Did the Anunnaki deliberately shorten our lifespans, ensuring that their new servants would never challenge them? At first, humans may have lived longer. The king list speaks of rulers who lived for centuries. The Bible echoes this, describing patriarchs who lived nearly 1,000 years. But something changed. Lifespans collapsed. Mortality became our inescapable truth. Was this a correction? A deliberate reprogramming of humanity's DNA? If so, then death itself is not destiny, it is design. Enki and Enlil, the divide between mercy and control among the Anunnaki. Two figures loom large in this story, Enki and Enlil. Enki, the scientist, the engineer of life, sought to preserve humanity. He warned of the flood, protected knowledge, and seemed to favor mankind. Enlil, Lord of Command, ruled with iron will. To him, humanity was noisy, troublesome, expendable. He ordered cullings, plagues, and restrictions. He demanded obedience, and he demanded limits. It is easy to see where mortality fits. To Enlil, humans were tools. Tools should not last forever. Enki may have wished otherwise, but even he could not undo the decrees of the assembly of gods. Thus, our DNA was not merely life-bearing, but life-limiting, the genetic marker of the gods in many myths. The gods are described as larger, stronger, longer-lived. Their blood was not ordinary. Was this difference biological? Could the Anunnaki have possessed genetic structures granting extraordinary longevity? Structures deliberately withheld from humanity? If divine DNA was the source of immortality, then the mixture that birthed humanity may have been carefully calibrated, enough to give us intelligence, strength, and adaptability, but not enough to make us rivals. The blood of the gods was power, but we were given only drops. The forbidden knowledge of healing in ancient texts hint at another truth, that the gods possessed knowledge of healing, rejuvenation, and even resurrection. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, Utnapishtim speaks of a plant that restores youth. In other myths, sacred waters, or foods, grant vitality. Always these gifts are guarded, hidden, denied. Why? Because if humanity could heal endlessly, if we could escape the decay written into our cells, the gods would lose their hold. Death was not just an end, it was a leash. Echoes in religion, the curse of mortality appears again and again, cloaked in divine language. In Genesis, Adam and Eve are barred from the tree of life, lest they live forever. In Mesopotamia, Gilgamesh's prize of youth is stolen before he can use it. In Greek myth, mortals who attempt to steal ambrosia are punished. Each tale tells the same truth. Life without end was within reach, and it was denied. The shadow of hybrid bloodlines. But what of those who were different? Legends speak of kings and heroes who were not fully mortal. Gilgamesh himself was part divine. The Nephilim of the Bible, giants born of gods and humans, lived long and powerfully. These figures suggest that where divine blood mixed more strongly, mortality loosened its grip. Hybrids may have lived longer, fought harder, ruled more fiercely. If so, then immortality was never entirely out of reach. It was a privilege of bloodline, and perhaps a privilege the gods jealously guarded. Was mortality a safeguard? Another possibility emerges. Perhaps mortality was not only control, but protection. The Anunnaki were few. Humanity was many. If humans lived as long as gods, if their numbers swelled beyond measure, could they have risen up? Could they have overwhelmed their creators? Mortality may have been a safeguard, a built-in failsafe to prevent rebellion. By ensuring we died, the Anunnaki ensured their dominion. The modern quest to break the curse today, science creeps toward the same frontier. We study DNA, splice genes, explore telomeres, and search for ways to halt aging. We speak openly of curing death, of downloading consciousness, of merging with machines. Are we rediscovering what the Anunnaki once held? Is our technology echoing their ancient science? Or are we still far from the secrets they buried? If humanity was designed to die, then our struggle against aging is not defiance of nature. It is rebellion against our creators. The hidden memory. In Mythway, do we dream of immortality? Why does every culture tell stories of forbidden life, lost longevity, stolen years? Perhaps because it is memory. A memory of what was once possible. A memory of what was taken. If death is encoded in us, then so too is the longing to undo it. Our myths are not fantasies. They are echoes of ancient truths, passed down in story, hidden in symbol. Waiting for rediscovery. Closing reflections. The Anunnaki may have given us intelligence, language, and civilization. But in our very DNA, they wrote the cruelest of limits: mortality. We are born with a ticking clock. We live under the shadow of death, not by accident, but by design. To the gods, this was necessary. To us, it is the great wound, the endless injustice. But perhaps the story is not finished. If they engineered us to die, then perhaps we can engineer ourselves to live. Perhaps the same science they wielded is not lost, only hidden, waiting to be unlocked. The question is not whether death is inevitable. The question is whether death is the destiny we were given, or the prison we can break. In the next chapter, we will explore a darker possibility still, where the Anunnaki, not only creators of humanity, but manipulators of bloodlines, shaping kings, priests, and rulers to serve their will through the ages. Chapter 18. Bloodlines of Power, the chosen of the Anunnaki. Throughout the ages, kings have claimed their authority from the heavens. Pharaohs called themselves sons of Ra. Emperors of Mesopotamia, ruled as chosen of Anu. Medieval monarchs clung to the divine right of kings. But what if these claims were not mere propaganda? What if certain bloodlines truly were divine, not by metaphor, but by blood? In this chapter, we uncover one of the darkest and most controversial aspects of the Anunnaki legacy, the manipulation of bloodlines, where the rulers of our ancient past selected, bred, and maintained by the gods themselves. And do echoes of this hidden lineage still ripple into our present? The royal seed of the god Sumerian records are unambiguous. Kingship, they said, descended from heaven. The Sumerian king list begins with this haunting phrase: after the kingship descended from heaven, Eridu became the seat of kingship. Kings were not elected, nor did they seize power by might alone. Their authority came from divine sanction. In many cases, they were said to carry the blood of gods. This concept appears everywhere. In Egypt, pharaohs were born of divine unions. In Greece, heroes like Heracles were children of Zeus. In Mesopotamia, rulers traced their descent to the Anunnaki themselves. Coincidence, or a global memory of divine human hybridization? Gilgamesh, the first hybrid king one figure, stands as the archetype, Gilgamesh. The great king of Uruk, subject of the world's first epic, was described as 2/3 divine and 1/3 human. This strange ratio implies something deliberate, a hybridization process. Gilgamesh was no mere man. His strength was unmatched, his life longer than ordinary mortals, his ambition boundless, and yet, he was denied immortality. He walked the line between God and human, chosen but limited. Gilgamesh's story reveals the Anunnaki's game: grant enough power to rule, but never enough to rival the gods themselves. Sacred bloodlines. Across the ancient world, the theme repeats across civilizations. Egypt. The pharaoh was Horus incarnate, son of Osiris and Isis, his body infused with divine essence. Mesoamerica. The Maya and Aztec rulers were said to descend from the gods, their rituals reinforcing their blood's sacred nature. China. The emperors ruled by the mandate of heaven, their lineage tied to celestial authority. Europe. Medieval. Kings claimed their blood carried divine sanction, a justification for absolute power. Everywhere, we see the same pattern: rulers elevated not only by politics, but by blood. This suggests more than myth. It suggests manipulation. The Anunnaki's genetic chess game. Why would the Anunnaki shape bloodlines? Controlled by embedding their essence in certain families, they created dynasties loyal to their will. These chosen rulers acted as intermediaries, enforcing divine authority on the masses while remaining dependent on their godly patrons. It was genetic, governance, the manipulation of blood to ensure political stability. This also explains the obsession with royal incest. In Egypt, pharaohs married sisters and daughters to preserve the divine blood. Across Mesopotamia, ruling families intermarried to keep the sacred seed untainted. To ordinary humans, this looked like tradition. To the Anunnaki, it was genetic strategy, the forbidden knowledge of the priest kings. Not only kings, but priests, too, were selected. In Mesopotamia, the high priestess often carried divine blood, serving as a ritual bride of the gods. Through these unions, bloodlines were reinforced, and knowledge passed on. These elites may have known fragments of the Anunnaki's science rituals, technologies, or arcane practices. To the masses, this was magic. To the initiates, it was inheritance. The divide between rulers and ruled was not only wealth and power, but biology. Echoes in myth. The Nephilim. The Bible offers its own clue. In Genesis 6, we read of the sons of God, who descended to take human wives, producing offspring called the Nephilim. These giants were mighty, renowned, and feared, though later demonized. The story matches the Sumerian accounts. The divine mingled with human flesh, producing rulers who were not entirely of this world. The Nephilim may have been the same hybrids who ruled as kings, their size and strength remembered as monstrous. The culling of bloodlines, but the gods were not careless. They allowed hybrids, but only within limits. Too much divine essence could threaten the balance. The flood narrative, repeated in Sumerian, Babylonian, and biblical texts, may have been more than judgment. It may have been a reset, a deliberate culling of bloodlines that grew too powerful, too independent. Only select families, Noah, Udnapishtim, Ziusudra, were preserved. Chosen lines survived, hand-picked by the gods, ensuring their influence continued, while dangerous hybrids were erased. The secret continuation of the bloodlines after the ancient flood. Kingship returned. Dynasties rose again, always claiming divine descent. The Sumerian king list insists kingship descended from heaven more than once. This raises a chilling possibility. The Anunnaki may have returned periodically, reseeding chosen lines when necessary, maintaining control across ages, and, perhaps, they never truly left. Medieval echoes. The divine right of kings. Fast forward thousands of years. In medieval Europe, monarchs clung to the doctrine of divine right. They ruled not by election, not by force alone, but by birth. Where did this belief come from? Why did people accept it so fully? Perhaps because, buried in cultural memory, was the truth. Some rulers really did descend from something more than human. The blood carried power. The people sensed it. The myth endured. The possibility of survival into the present here lies the most unsettling question. Did these manipulated bloodlines survive into modern times? Some conspiracy theories suggest that global elites, royal families, and secret societies still trace their ancestry to the ancient hybrids. Claims abound of carefully guarded genealogies, intermarriages, and rituals preserving the divine seed. Is this paranoia? Or does it echo the truth of what began in Sumer? Why the bloodlines matter of humanity as a whole was engineered as workers. Then these bloodlines were the overseers, the managers, the chosen. They stood between gods and mortals, both elevated and enslaved by their heritage. The bloodlines matter because they reveal the core of the Anunnaki project, control, through division. By selecting some as rulers and others as subjects, they ensured obedience without needing constant intervention. It was a hierarchy written not just in politics, but in DNA. Closing reflections from Sumer to Egypt, from the Bible to medieval Europe. The pattern repeats. Rulers claiming divine descent. Bloodlines elevated above the masses. The hybrid legacy of the gods. If the Anunnaki truly shaped our past, then kingship was not a natural development. It was a program. And the chosen rulers were pawns, carefully bred, carefully maintained, their bloodlines orchestrated across millennia. The chilling truth may be this: the legacy of the Anunnaki lives not only in myth, but in blood. In the next chapter, we go deeper still. We ask, what of the great temples and monuments? Were these structures not only places of worship, but centers of power, where chosen rulers communed directly with their creators? Chapter 19. Temples of the Gods. Power, ritual, and control across the ancient world. Temples rise like frozen thunder, massive stone structures, towering ziggurats, pyramids, sanctuaries, carved into cliffs. Their forms haunting, eternal. To the modern eye, they are ruins. To the ancients, they were not simply places of worship. They were gateways, gateways to the gods, gateways to power, gateways to control. In this chapter, we uncover the role temples played in the Anunnaki project. Far from being mere shrines, they were centers of administration, energy, and ritual, the very infrastructure through which divine rule was enforced upon humanity. The temple as command center in Sumer, the temple was the heart of the city. Each city-state revolved around its ziggurat, the towering multi-tiered pyramid of mud brick that dominated the skyline. But these ziggurats were not just symbolic, they were functional. At their base, bureaucracies hummed, priests managed grain, livestock, trade. Scribes recorded every transaction on clay tablets. Armies were supplied, workers fed, offerings tallied. The temple was not simply religious. It was economic, political, and military power concentrated in one place. And who stood at its peak? The god of the city, or more precisely, the human rulers who acted as the gods' representatives. This was control made physical. If kings were the chosen bloodlines, temples were the infrastructure that maintained their authority. Ziggurats, stairways to heaven. The most striking feature of the Sumerian city was the ziggurat, a massive stepped tower rising high above the plains. Its name means to build high. Its purpose? To connect heaven and earth. The gods, the Anunnaki, were said to descend upon these platforms. Rituals were performed at the summit, sacrifices offered, hymns sung. To the people, the ziggurat was the stairway to the divine. But from another perspective, it was a landing pad, a literal high platform where beings from the skies could descend. Some researchers suggest the flat tops were designed for the crafts of the gods, chariots of fire that shimmered above. Whether symbolic or literal, the ziggurat was the nexus of divine presence. It reminded the people daily that their gods ruled from above, and their kings below were chosen by them. Egypt, the temple, as machine of Sumer, gave us ziggurats. Egypt gave us pyramids. The pyramids of Giza remain the most enigmatic structures on earth. Scholars call them tombs, but inside them, no bodies were ever found. Their precision defies explanation. The alignment with the stars, the impossible stone cutting, the sheer scale, it suggests a purpose far greater than funerary ritual. Some theories claim the pyramids were energy devices, collectors of cosmic or telluric power, amplifiers of resonance, perhaps even machines built under the guidance of the gods. And at their heart, temples connected to the pyramids served as ritual centers. Priests conducted offerings, processions, and initiations. The pharaoh himself, divine, used these spaces as chambers of transformation, ensuring his bond with the gods remained unbroken. The temple was not only a monument, it was a technology of control. Ritual as governance. Why did rituals matter so much? Because ritual was power. Every offering, every sacrifice, every chant reinforced the hierarchy. The people brought food, livestock, gold, and labor to the temple. The gods received it, but in reality, the priests and kings consumed it, redistributed it, and used it to strengthen their rule. Religion was the cloak, control was the substance. When thousands gathered at the ziggurat steps, watching priests ascend to commune with the gods, they were reminded of their place. When the pharaoh entered the temple to perform sacred rites, the entire nation believed he spoke with Ra himself. Through ritual, the Anunnaki and their chosen rulers governed not just bodies, but minds. The role of sacrifice one cannot discuss temples without facing their darker side. Sacrifice. From Mesopotamia to Mesoamerica, temples reeked of blood. Sheep, goats, bulls, and even humans were slain in the name of gods. Why? Was it superstition or necessity? Some researchers suggest the Anunnaki demanded sacrifice not for worship, but for sustenance. The energy of blood, the life force released in ritual, may have been required for them to maintain influence. Others propose it was psychological warfare, a display of dominance. binding humans in fear and obedience. Whatever the truth, temples were the stage for these acts. Every drop of blood reminded humanity of the terrible power of their gods. The priesthood, guardians of knowledge of kings, were the chosen bloodlines. Priests were the chosen minds. The priesthood controlled access to the gods. They read omens, interpreted dreams, conducted rituals. They preserved knowledge in cuneiform texts, guarded secrets of astronomy, medicine, and agriculture. But they were not free agents. They were extensions of the temple system, administrators of the divine. Will in their hands, knowledge became power. They told the people when to sow and reap, when to sacrifice, when the gods were angry or pleased. By monopolizing knowledge, they monopolized truth. The temple was the first school, the first court, the first treasury, the first archive. To question it was to question the gods themselves, sacred geometry, and cosmic alignment across the globe. Temples share a disturbing similarity. They are aligned with the stars, the ziggurats of Mesopotamia, the pyramids of Egypt, the temples of Mesoamerica, even Stonehenge, all point to celestial phenomena. Orion, Sirius, the solstices, the equinoxes. Why this obsession? Because the gods came from the sky. Aligning temples with the heavens was not aesthetic, it was functional. These structures may have acted as beacons, markers, or resonators, connecting earthly centers of power with celestial points of origin. Each temple was a node in a vast network, linking humanity to the realm of its masters. The temple economy beneath the sacred veneer. Temples ran the world's first economies. In Sumer, the temple stored grain, collected taxes, managed trade. Workers labored on temple lands, producing food for the god's household. Tribute flowed upward, rations trickled downward. In effect, the temple was the state. To defy it was not rebellion against rulers, it was rebellion against the gods. This ensured absolute obedience. To eat, to work, to live, you needed the temple, and the gods, unseen, pulled the strings, the silence of the gods. But here lies the haunting question. Were the gods truly present in these temples? Ancient texts insist they were. Statues were not mere symbols, they were inhabited by divine essence. Priests performed daily rituals to awaken and feed them. The people believed the gods dwelled within, yet, from another view, these statues may have been technological devices, interfaces, perhaps even communication tools. When priests spoke with the gods, were they engaged in ritual theater, or operating ancient machines that allowed contact with beings far away? The silence of ruins today leaves us guessing, but in antiquity, temples rang with voices, and those voices controlled empires. The spread of the temple system, the pattern was global. In Mesopotamia, ziggurats anchored cities, like Uruk and Eridu. In Egypt, pyramids and mortuary temples stretched across the Nile. In Mesoamerica, stepped pyramids like Teotihuacan mirrored the Sumerian design. In Asia, temples like Enki aligned with celestial maps. Different cultures, same blueprint. The temple system was not isolated invention. It was dissemination, a plan carried across continents, a fingerprint of the Anunnaki, wherever they ruled, control through AOT. Its core. The temple system worked because it inspired awe. When a peasant gazed up at a ziggurat towering over the flat plains, he felt small. When a farmer approached the pyramids of Giza, their sheer size crushed his will to resist. When a worshipper entered the grand halls of Karnak, the columns like forests of stone, he felt the presence of gods. This awe was psychological control. Architecture became propaganda. The stone itself was power. The message was clear. The gods are mighty, and you are nothing. Closing reflections. The temples of the ancient world were not simply places of prayer. They were machines of power, political, economic, and psychological. They gathered tribute, preserved knowledge, conducted rituals, and maintained the bloodlines of rulers. They connected earth to sky, humans to gods, mortals to their masters. In their shadows, civilizations rose and fell, and in their ruins, we still feel the weight of something beyond human, a legacy too vast to ignore. But this legacy raises the next chilling question. If temples were the centers of control, then what of the wars fought over them? Were the endless conflicts of ancient history truly between humans, or battles of the gods themselves, using humanity as their pawns? That is the mystery we explore in the next chapter. Chapter 20. Wars of the Gods, Humanity as Pawns. Throughout history, wars have shaped civilizations. But what if the greatest wars of antiquity were not truly human at all? What if the endless conflicts, the burning cities, the toppled empires, the rivers of blood were battles between the gods themselves, with humanity caught in the crossfire? This is the chilling possibility we must confront. The Anunnaki, those ancient rulers from the skies, did not always agree, and when gods went to war, the earth itself trembled. The seeds of conflict. Every empire seeks dominance. Every ruler hungers for more. Why should the Anunnaki have been different? Ancient texts whisper of rivalries among the gods. Brothers clashed. Sisters schemed. Families fractured. Their ambitions spilled into the mortal world, where kings and armies became their instruments. The Epic of Atrahasis speaks of disputes over labor. The Enuma Elish tells of gods battling gods for supremacy. Egyptian myths describe Horus and Set locked in eternal war. Even the Greek pantheon echoes with divine feuds that engulfed humanity. These were not isolated stories. They were fragments of one truth. The gods fought, and humans paid the price. The Sumerian wars in Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization. The Anunnaki established their first cities. But peace did not last. The gods divided the lands among themselves. Enlil claimed Sumer. Enki took the waters. Inanna, fierce and ambitious, demanded her own dominion. Rivalries grew. Texts tell us of the kingship descending from heaven, handed to one city after another. Eridu, Uruk, Uruk-Kish. Each rose and fell. Why? Because the gods withdrew their favor. Because one faction rose while another fell. Behind the shifting capitals of Sumer was not politics, but divine warfare. Each city-state was a battlefield in the Anunnaki's struggle for control. Inanna, the goddess of war, no figure, embodies this. More than Inanna, goddess of love and war. Inanna was not content to serve quietly. She sought power, conquest, supremacy. Myths tell of her seizing the sacred Me, the tablets of destiny, from Enki himself. Others speak of her marching on cities, demanding thrones, using kings as her pawns. Inanna's wars were not metaphor. They were real campaigns, armies clashing under divine banners. When Inanna fought, tens of thousands of humans perished, and yet the people adored her, for in her fury, they saw both destruction and protection. She was the patroness of empire, the embodiment of divine ambition. The War of Yor, one of the most catastrophic episodes in Mesopotamian history, was the fall of Yor. Ancient laments describe it in haunting tones. The storm of Anu raged. The people perished in fire. The city was left desolate. Archaeology confirms sudden destruction, fire, collapse, abandonment. But the texts suggest it was not merely human invasion. It was divine punishment. Some scholars claim this was the result of a war between Enlil's faction and Enki's. Others hint at something even darker, the use of weapons of terror, unleashed by the gods themselves. Could these be ancient descriptions of technologies beyond human comprehension? The laments speak of heat so intense it withered crops, winds so foul they killed livestock, a silence that followed as if life itself had been erased. Was this a memory of nuclear-like devastation in the ancient world? Egypt. The struggle of Horus and Set, the same pattern, emerges in Egypt. Horus, the falcon god, and Set, the lord of chaos, waged war for centuries. Their battles were not allegory. They were real conflicts, reflected in shifting dynasties and bloodshed. Along the Nile, pharaohs claimed descent from Horus, legitimizing their rule as continuation of his victory. But in times of chaos, Set's shadow rose, plunging the land into civil strife. The temples, the armies, the kings themselves, all were pawns in the cosmic struggle. The Greek echoes, by the time the myths reached Greece, the wars of the gods, had become legend. The Titanomachy, the war between Titans and Olympians. The Gigantomachy, the battle against the giants. Zeus, overthrowing Cronus. The Olympians warring among themselves. To later generations, these were stories. But to those who lived in the shadow of the Anunnaki, they were memories. Memories of divine wars, reshaped into myth. The weapons of the gods. What did the gods fight with? Texts describe terrifying weapons. The brilliance, a weapon that blinded armies. The seven storms, winds that swept cities away. The weapon that scorched earth, leaving fields barren. The black death from the sky, invisible but lethal to modern ears. These sound disturbingly familiar. Radiation, chemical, weapons, advanced technology. Were these battles of swords and chariots, or wars of machines and fire, incomprehensible to ancient eyes? Humanity as soldiers. The most tragic element is this: the gods did not fight alone. They conscripted humans. Kings raised armies, not for their own ambitions, but to serve their divine patrons. Cities warred because their gods demanded it. Tenians of humans died in wars that were never theirs. We were pawns, expendable pieces on a cosmic chessboard, and perhaps we still are. The fall of civilizations. Look at history's pattern. Civilizations rise, achieve greatness, then collapse in sudden ruin. Sumer, Akkad, your Babylon, Egypt's old kingdom, the Indus Valley, the Maya. Each flourished under divine kingship, temple power, and apparent divine favor. Each fell in fire, famine, or sudden abandonment. Coincidence? Or were these the aftermaths of wars among the gods? Perhaps when one faction lost, its cities burned. When another rose, new empires emerged. Humanity's golden ages were tied to divine alliances, and our dark ages to divine defeat. The nuclear desolation theorem, among the most haunting pieces of evidence, lies in Mesopotamia itself. Archaeologists have found layers of earth vitrified, turned to glass by extreme heat. Descriptions in ancient texts of the great wind that laid waste eerily resemble accounts of fallout. Cities like Sodom and Gomorrah are said to have been destroyed by fire from heaven. Indian epics, like the Mahabharata, describe weapons that shone brighter than 1,000 suns. Corpses burned beyond recognition, rivers poisoned. Were these not allegories, but literal memories of ancient weapons of mass destruction, the arsenal of the gods? If so, then the wars of the Anunnaki were not myth. They were apocalyptic. The silence after the storm, and then silence by the close of the second millennium BCE. The great gods withdrew. Their temples still stood, their rituals still performed, but the thunder of their presence faded. Had they destroyed each other? Had they abandoned their pawns? Or had humanity finally outlived its usefulness? The wars of the gods ended, but only because the gods themselves vanished. The legacy of divine wars, yet the scars remain. Our myths remember them as legends. Our ruins bear their destruction. Our religions echo their feuds in the struggles of light and darkness, good and evil, heaven and hell. We inherited their wars as our own. Nations still fight in the name of gods. Armies still march under banners of the divine. The echoes of the Anunnaki's conflicts shape our world to this day. Closing reflections. And so, we reach the end of this journey. The Anunnaki, architects of civilization, rulers of humanity, makers of kings. They gave us cities, writing, laws, temples. But they also gave us war, slavery, sacrifice, and fear. Their bloodlines shaped empires. Their temples controlled our lives. Their rivalries destroyed our cities. We were not the masters of our destiny. We were the pawns of beings far greater, far darker, and perhaps, in ways unseen. We still are, for if the Anunnaki once ruled openly, what if they never truly left? What if their wars continue, hidden, reshaping our world from the shadows? That is the dark history we may never escape. And so, the shadows close on another chapter of dark history. We've walked among gods and tyrants, through ruins and forgotten bloodlines, and uncovered truths the world was never meant to remember. But this is only the beginning. History hides countless more secrets, darker, stranger, and more terrifying than you can imagine. And here, on Dark History, we will drag them into the light. If you crave the hidden, if you seek the forbidden, if you dare to question what others accept, then this is your sanctuary. Subscribe now, join the Legion of the Curious, and never miss the next descent into the past's darkest corners. The story continues, and you won't want to be left behind. This is Dark History, where the shadows speak,